IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. That's Trevor Trowbridge. I'm Brian Driscoll. We've got a great show for you planned today, and we're going to bring it as best we can today because, Trevor, I need to make sure that as my dad's driving around today working, that he has a great show to listen to because it is his birthday. It's his 71st birthday. April 7th was my mom's 70th birthday. Wish her a very happy birthday, and today it's my dad's 71st birthday, so happy birthday, Dad. I know he listens, Trev. He's finally gotten over your Minions comment. He's over it. He's past it. He's moved past it. So it took a while. You know, they went on a cruise last week with my sister and the grandkids, so I think that helped him get over it. You know, you thank my sister for that one. But yeah, no, he's past it. But yeah, Dad, happy birthday. We love you, appreciate you, and hope you have an awesome day, and I hope you enjoy the show. Trev and I have a jam-packed schedule for you guys today, and we're really looking forward to diving into this. It's going to be a fun topic today, Trev. Very, very fun. Well, let me rephrase. Going to be some fun topics today that we're very much looking forward to discussing.
I was about to say, man, I started rechecking my outline. I was like, one topic. I was like, I think I might have the wrong thing. Oh, no, I didn't prep the right way. I was like, here we go. But no, man.
It's huge topic, Trev. Did you not get the email? I swear I sent it to you, man. My bad.
I need to get it together. Really
Vice President, my butt. Yeah, right.
That's the Vince side of me. That's the Vince Trowbridge. Trevor Trowbridge is ready to rock and roll today. But yes, happy birthday to Brian's dad. Hope it's a great day. My dad's birthday is actually in 2 days. So funny how that pans out.
That's
awesome. Our dad's birthdays are 2 days apart.
So April is the second best month of the year. May is the best month of the year, clearly, since because like April's cool. It's it's my wedding anniversary, your dad's birthday, both of my parents' birthdays, and then May, of course, is the month because that's both of our birthdays. So
100%, man.
Yeah.
100%. But Brian's right. We have a loaded show coming your guys' way today. We're kicking things off. Now, Friday is the last practice that we have access to prior to the Blue Gold game. Saturday, excuse me. Days are starting to run together. Saturday is the last practice. Yeah, it's off season's flying by before you know. I need the season because I know I guess outside of their season opener, every day that Notre Dame plays until the postseason, it's going to be a Saturday. But yes, Saturday is the last practice that we have access to before the Blue Gold game. So we're going to kick off today's show by kind of going through what we're hoping to see. We get full access. We're going to be there the entire time. We're going to break down what we want to see from the team as a whole, more big picture, talk about offense, and then talk about defense. And then in part two of today's show, like the title suggests of today's podcast, there's been a lot of chatter this offseason so far about Notre Dame's schedule this year. Nobody's claiming that it's a gauntlet, but it's also not like what Texas Tech and Penn State schedule looks like. The truth is somewhere in between. So we're going to kind of break it down by opponent and not give like this is what Notre Dame has to do to win, but more so this is what the opponents have to do for this schedule to be looked at in a certain light. You're going to need some teams to be everything that we thought they were. A couple of surprise teams wouldn't hurt. And then some other teams towards the bottom of the schedule, they need to perform a little bit better than what they have in previous years. So that's what we're talking about in part two. And then to wrap everything up today, folks, as you know, the Clemson home and home series that's scheduled out for 12 seasons starting in 2027 kicks off next year. And we're going to talk about what it kind of means for Clemson to have a rebound, what it means for Notre Dame, because they need to for a lot of reasons. And so it's going to be a fun, loaded topic today, man. And I'm excited to dive into this one. I am
too, Trev. It's going to be a blast, and really just diving into real quick. Got some Kay Grant with a super chat. Girls are here and healthy. Mommy is doing great and resting. Thank you for the prayers, Kay Grant. Just a reminder to y'all, Kay Grant, Carrie is having twins, and they had twins, and they're bringing them home today. So very, very happy for him. I got some IB onesies on the way for you guys, so you guys will get those here very soon. But he has twin girls. So we've had some great, beginning of the show personal news. We had Brandon Rouse's news about him graduating college yesterday. Today, my guy Kay Grant's just bringing the twins home. So we're happy for you, brother. Really appreciate that. Appreciate the super chat. You just had twins, man. You need to keep all that money to yourself, my man, because you're gonna have twins here. But we're excited about it, man. We appreciate you. But I'm excited about this practice this weekend, Trev. I really am, because we got a chance to see the first practice, and then we've seen little 5-minute periods a couple times, or 4 or 5 minute periods the last couple practices, and we haven't really seen a whole lot. And I've kind of said, if you're not going to give us a lot of access, the ideal scenario is like beginning, middle, end, and just give us 3 fulls. But if we're only going to get 2, I really like that this is the two we're going to get. We get to see the very first practice. Okay, this is what guys look like. I mean, I remember watching the first practice, Trev, and you looking at me and you're like Devin Fitzgerald and a couple of his friends, like they're so lost right now. I mean, it was so obvious just going, because think about it, this is the first time they're lining up and getting in a stance the way Mike Brown wants it. It's the first time that they're doing this. It's the first time they put the gold helmet, all this other kind of stuff. And then to see them the kind of next couple times, see Devin really quickly develop and get comfortable. Well, now April 18th, we get to see like beyond just, okay, we know he's comfortable in drills. Now we get to see those guys kind of this is really going to be the last big practice of the spring. And like the two practices leading up to the blue gold game are just kind of like, this is the final big practice for Notre Dame. So it's going to get a great chance to see how this team has evolved. We're not going to have all of our questions answered this spring. We're just not. And we didn't expect, honestly, to have all the questions answered. But I'm curious to see, like, what questions do we have answered, Trev? Like, are certain things? And so what we're going to talk about today is, what are the things we're hoping to see or we're looking for? It's not always just hoping to see, but just what we're looking for and evaluating where they are in this area. It's not always like they're here, this is good or bad. It's just more about, this is where they are. And now we know as of April 18th, this is where they are. And now we need to know, boy, they're rolling here, or, okay, some work to be done. And that for coaches, that's a great period of time, because you have that final evaluation. You go back and you look at this growth of the spring, say, okay, boy, we really need to work on this kid or that kid. Or, we weren't great this spring working on this run concept. Let's really work on that. Or let's evaluate it. Why weren't we good at it? Well, we weren't good at it because this kid kept kicking our butt on defense. Well, why? Or do we have an issue on? No. Or it just can be like, hey, look, we kept giving up the backside. This run play we kept giving up the backside. Okay, so we need some counters off of that. Or we need to do some things to make sure we're securing the backside. So there's all different types of things that you look at and evaluate. You look at CJ, you'll really dive into CJ Carr's numbers in the spring. Okay, what were the things CJ was? Boy, he was like 83% on this route concept. Well, he's only 48% on this route concept. Well, it's 4 verts and we're throwing all goes. You're going to be lower. But, man, we want to be around 55. What was the issue? Okay, we had a few too many drops. Our receivers weren't having good spacing. We were doing this. We were doing that. Whatever the case may be. And again, I'm making up numbers, folks. So don't be like, oh, shoot, Driscoll said that CJ Carr is struggling on all verts. No, it's not. I'm just making stuff up to show, like, this is the evaluation process, that you don't make that decision midway through spring. You let the kind of spring develop. Then you make those evaluations as you go into the summer and you get ready for fall camp. So what we're going to do is just kind of some team things and some offense and some defensive things that Trev and I are going to be looking for as we evaluate practice this weekend. And Vince is a slacker. He won't be there this weekend. He gave me the whole, so I told him, hey, man, I'm going to get your credentials for it. And he gave me the whole, oh, I want to be a good dad and be my son's spring game, which is Saturday, BS, that whole thing, the whole parent thing that I got. He played that card on me. So, but no, in seriousness, that's awesome. Dylan's spring game is going to be this weekend. So that's where Vince will be. So it'll be me and Trev at practice, really evaluating what we see. And we'll have a report afterwards to tell you all about it. But we are going in there. We're not going in there blind, like, well, let's just see how it goes. We have some things that we're going to be looking for as we dive into this practice. And that's what we want to talk about in part 1 today.
We are, Brian. Let's start big picture here. Before we dive too much into the weeds on offense or defense, let's talk big picture team. And the first thing that we're going to be paying attention to is, what's the focus? What's the energy level? What's the level of competitiveness? There's been a lot of things that we've heard about this team through interviews conducted on, national outlets, things that we've heard in press conferences about the chippiness of practice and how competitive it is. Everybody's working to get better. In one of your previous practice reports, you talked about how, some position groups, it was a little sloppy, but it's because I think at the time you said it looked like a group of guys that just had a week off of practice, because they did just have a week off of practice. They were coming off of celebrating the Easter holiday. So what is that level of focus for them on Saturday morning? Was that just kind of hey, we're shaking off a little bit of the rust, we're getting back into the groove, and now we're gelling right along, getting ready to walk into the spring game? Or is it, a little bit lingering? Something that we're going to be paying attention to, but definitely the energy level and the competitiveness as well.
No question. Although I will not be shocked, Trevor, at all, if Marcus Freeman has a little talk with his team about, hey, y'all, we're not going to be getting into these like little scuffles. Like, let's be real cognizant of the fact that we're not going to do that, because I think he knows that'll be all some outlets are going to want to talk about. So I do think we'll see a little bit of that. Doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily listen to them, I mean, if they're that intense, but you don't have to scuffle to see intensity. You don't have to scuffle to see focus. You don't have to scuffle to see, what your enthusiasm is, to what are you locked in or not. You don't have to, get into a scuffle to be competitive with each other, to battle with each other. It doesn't have to result in pushing and shoving after the play. It's even more so about what happens kind of between the whistles. And so that's the biggest thing, Trev, is what's the tempo like? What's the energy like? What's the focus like? And, and then part of that too, it ties into that, Trev, is like, where's the leadership coming from outside of a Don Schuler and Drake Bowen? Like who, as we're watching different position groups, who's starting to take hold of those positions? I think that's something also that I'm very curious to see this spring.
Yeah, absolutely. And leaders emerging doesn't have to be who's putting themselves in position to have that C on their chest in the fall. It's just who are the players that you can see within position groups that other players are turning to for guidance, for questions, for evaluating their own performances. And that's going to be a big thing to keep an eye on. That I'm excited about. That is something that you can see early on in drills, carry over into the team period, 7-on-7 inside run, things like that. Very excited for that. And Brian, the other thing we're going to be paying attention to as well. A couple weeks ago, we talked about the spring breakouts, and a lot of the focus was on the wide receiver room and the defensive line room. Very excited to see how that process is coming along, because to your point, there's only so much you can see in drills, routes versus air. It's like, hey, that was a crisp, clean route, but I didn't want you to go up against anybody. I see that you're more comfortable lining up in your stance, but what is it like when they put a safety over top of you? What is it like when you get press coverage? So then same thing on the defensive line. Very excited to see how both of those things pan out.
Absolutely. And look, when we went through the kind of predicted breakouts, there's different levels and things like that. And as we're going through it, like there was a lot of these players, like you said, Trev, in the conversation, because that's where a lot of the, there's a lot of talent there. That's number one. And there are positions where a lot of guys are being expected, and we're hoping that we'll kind of take big jumps as players. Whereas, I don't know that secondary breakouts, you've got guys playing different positions. I don't know how much of a breakout we're going to see in practice from Tay Johnson and Don Schuler. That's going to really be an evaluation more in the fall in games. With these guys, Jordan Faison, I don't know that if like we're thinking he can be a breakout to where he becomes like, like a TJ Jones type of breakout, right? Like that's certainly possible for a guy like Jordan Faison, the way that he's developed this past year. But like that's not going to really be something that we're going to see in practice. That's going to be something more that we're going to see in games. But there are plenty of things that we can learn in practice when you look at this group from guys that we just haven't seen as much from, right? Like we're going to learn a lot more about Micah Gilbert in practice than we will Jordan Faison or Jaden Greathouse. Like honestly, with Jaden Greathouse, I just care that he's healthy. I don't really care about anything else. I do want to see more from Micah Gilbert. I do care about what are we seeing from Cam Williams? What are we seeing from Elijah Burris and guys like that? Defensive line wise, I don't know that I put a lot of stock in what we see from Boubacar Traore, but I do care a little bit more about Bryce Young. I care more about how Logan Thomas looks. I care more about how Armel Mukam looks and guys like that. And so as you look at possible breakouts, Trev, I think Ethan Long or Luke Talich was one of yours. I remember you had a safety as one of your potential breakouts. Was it Ethan Long? Yeah. How's he looking? I care a lot more about that right now than what Tay Johnson looks like. With Tay, it's just kind of like, oh, Tay being Tay. Now it's like, okay, I want to see him do that against Miami, and I want to see him do that against BYU. I don't really care to see him do that against the second team offense because I know he can do that because I've already seen him do that in games. It's just like, hey, dude, stay healthy. So I think those things are part of it too, Trev, is you want to be able to see the growth of those guys that we are hoping become breakout players. And if they don't practice well, if Micah Gilbert only has 2 catches in all the team periods, it doesn't mean he's not going to be on a breakout. It just sometimes those things happen, but it's still an evaluation of where they are in the other aspects of it, right? And as a receivers coach, I can evaluate how my guy performs even if the ball doesn't come his way a whole bunch. And like those are things that I'll be walking like, hey man, he didn't get the ball there, but did you see him smoke that dude on the backside of that route? Like those kind of things that we'll be watching and seeing. And oh man, Anthony Knapp just got beat on that rep, a guard by Francis Brew. wow, did you see how he was the next 3 reps? Like, he destroyed the D-line the next 3 reps. Like, he bounced back from that mistake and just – I mean, they ran like 2 out of their next 3 runs were touchdowns because Anthony just took the one technique and washed him to the right side of the offensive line. Like, those are things that you're evaluating right now in a practice. It's not so much the same as a game where it's like, you know, you're looking for perfection and you're looking for this and your yards per attempt and yards per completion and all that. You're just seeing, like, where's their development? Where's their competitiveness? Are they taking steps towards being that guy we hope that they're going to be in the fall?
No, I think that's very well said. It's evaluating the process. Look, we're at the time of the offseason, and I get the same way, guys. Like, you can even ask Brian. I call him on the phone all the time. We're sitting there talking. Like, I just wish we knew. I wish we knew that this is what the lineup is going to be. I wish I could confidently tell you, and we look into our crystal ball and say, yep, this guy's going to have 30 catches, 400 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns this year. We're good to go. Mm-hmm. Let's enjoy the postseason. But tomorrow or Saturday's about evaluating the process. And are they taking the necessary strides to become the players that they're able to be? Now, I'm not going to be upset if we go to that practice tomorrow and we look at a guy like a Micah Gilbert or a Cam Williams or an Elijah Burris and say, yeah, they're just going to be a dude this year. You know, I will not be upset if that happens.
Yeah, we're definitely rooting against it. You
know, no, not at all. But
it's about setting proper expectations,
exactly,
for people. That when we're like, hey, this guy did well, it's not coming back saying like, he had 9 catches during the team periods. It's not so much that. It's about, are they growing as players? And the biggest thing so far for Micah Gilbert is he's been at practice every day. It's kind of been a big deal for him.
Major step. Definitely major step in the right direction. But the potential breakout players aren't some of the only ones that we're going to be paying attention to tomorrow, Brian. Obviously, this is also a big opportunity for us to see how the transfers and the incoming true freshmen have continued to evolve as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, you brought it up, and I'm excited because I haven't seen a practice since the very first one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is going to be a big, like, I haven't seen them since before it was just helmets and jerseys. So now I'm very excited to see the true freshmen. And, you know, you brought it up at the start of the show that, you know, first day, Devin Fitzgerald, guys like that, Bubba Frazier, Caden Finley, then on the defensive side, guys like Joey O'Brien and Aiden Pouncey, they're swimming a little bit. Very excited to see what that looks like from them on Saturday. And that'll be something we're evaluating as well.
Yeah. Very, very, I mean, honestly, that's probably the group that I'm most intrigued by are the newcomers, the transfers and the look, I don't, like I said, I don't care that what I see from Jordan Faison or Jaden Greathouse. I mean, if they play great, that's awesome. I'm not like, oh, dang it, freaking Faison dominated today. This is the worst thing that could have happened to me. It's just more so like, there's a level of, I mean, I watched him dominate Ohio State and Penn State. I don't care what he did on a Saturday practice in April. I just want him to be healthy. Saw Jordan Faison dominate Indiana in the playoff game. I don't need to see him. I don't need to see him in April. But I do have questions about Mylan Graham, and not like questions like, oh, he can't play, but like, guy's got 6 career catches. I don't know what he's going to be. What kind of growth has he shown in the offense? What kind of connection are him and CJ showing? Where's he playing? Is he just in the slot? Is he playing inside and outside? Is he maybe playing some boundary? I think that's a big thing. Keep hearing a lot about Bubba Frazier. Now, these are 2 people that are not surprised by that. I've been hyping up Bubba Frazier since he committed to Notre Dame because he's dynamic and was vastly underrated. How does he look in a setting like this, where maybe there's a little bit more pressure on it? How's Caden Finley? I mean, we saw him, he has not caught on quite as quickly as Bubba has for a lot of reasons. I think part of it is learning some new things. He's not the most physically gifted player on the field all the time as he was in high school because you weren't going against Leonard Moore and guys like that in high school. But he's coming along. He's looked better each practice. And then, of course, we saw the one-handed catch that he made against Luke Talich. I just got to say something about that real quick. Speaking of newcomers we want to see, and we'll talk about this more specifically, but that was as good of a ball as you can get as a quarterback. And I know you're thinking, well, he had to die for it. Did you see how close Luke Talich was in coverage? If you just drop it right here, Luke's probably breaking that up. Like, that was an absolute dime by Noah Grubbs. By the way, I just want to say that real quick. But, defensively, the intel piece I had last week about the team, hearing a lot of good things about Tion Gray. Keon Keeley's coming along. How's Francis Brood doing? Hearing a lot of good things about Jaden Sanders. What's he looking like? Same thing with the freshman. You mentioned Joey O'Brien. I want to see that. I've heard some good things about Aiden Pouncey. I want to see how he's progressing. So yeah, there's a lot of that. I mean, I'm hoping that I can pay a little bit more attention to Thomas Davis this practice. He's a freshman that I got my eye on, and then of course the 2 freshmen in. So the newcomers obviously are going to be. We're going to have a very keen eye on those guys as well this week. So I want to see how they're growing and adapting, and how are they interacting with the players? Like, are we seeing that that kind of that connection, that bond where it's like, okay, you're not the Pitt transfer anymore, you're not the Ohio State transfer anymore. You're our guys. You're with us. You're our boys. You're part of the family now, and I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Let's dive into specifics here, man, and talk about the offense first. And yes, I understand a lot of people still want to talk about CJ Carr, and rightfully so. I get it. He's the favorite on FanDuel to win the Heisman. He's Notre Dame's first returning starting quarterback since Ian Book in 2020. But there's some other things that we're going to be paying attention to on Saturday, and it starts with the big boys up front, talking about the offensive line. A major box was checked when we were there in the first day of practice. What is their alignment? Where are they going to be lining up at? Now it's about how are they developing as a new unit. That's going to be a huge thing that we're evaluating on Saturday.
I mean, this is the first time we're going to see Will Black go against a defensive player at left tackle with pads on. I mean, because the first day of full fall camp, we saw him in no pads, right? I mean, the practice, we have Gideon Rosa, who's now the videographer at Notre Dame, had a great video, 3-minute video of just the offensive line from practice. And we get to see Will Black, and he looks great. But again, he's lining up and hitting another offensive lineman as they're working on their assignments and footwork and drive blocking and stuff like that. I hope we get a chance to see a little bit of reps where he's going against Bryce and Boubacar and Keon and even the freshmen and see how he's developing. How's the connection between him and Anthony Knapp coming along? We've heard good things. Joe Rudolph said a lot of good things about it, and I believe it. I don't think he'd say it if it wasn't true, but now we need to see it. We had first day of practice. We were talking about how, that Gerby Sully Absher duo was clicking day one. They're picking up stunts, they're passing guys off. And I'm like, okay, dude, was that just first day? They weren't seeing a whole lot. Are they still clicking like that? Those are all things that I want to see. How's Matty Augustine coming along? It's kind of that guy that's been a bit of a swing player. So how's Anthony Knapp coming along as a guard? So there's a lot of talk about it, but where is the development of that group as a unit? Now, it can't be full development this spring because there's no Ashton Craig, but you can still see a lot. And based on history, we can't assume that Ashton Craig is going to be there for 15, 16 games this year. So there may be a moment where we need to see that group of Joe Otting. And so how does he do? Or do they maybe give Cam Herron some first-team reps? I've heard some great things about Sullivan Garvin. So O-line is definitely a position that we're going to try to be locked on as much as possible on Saturday. And I really want to see how they compete. I've heard the battles with the D-line have been great. And that's a good sign because this is a very good D-line. I hope we get a chance to see some of that.
I'm same boat as you are. Can't wait to watch the trench play, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Also looking forward to seeing how the wide receiver progression is coming along. We talked about some Bub Frazier, Mylan Graham, how they're going to be fitting in some of the newcomers, but really paying attention to and honing in on guys like Micah Gilbert. Is all the things that we're starting to hear about him now that the pads are on, are those really coming to fruition? Is Cam Williams and Elijah Burst truly making those necessary strides along with some of the freshmen? What does Caden Finley look like? What does Devin Fitzgerald look like? How far along is Bubba Frazier? Things like that. It's all going to be very interesting. I'm pumped to see this group.
And who's where.
Yes.
That's going to be a big one for me. I want to see, one of the big issues we've had in the spring with the receivers the past few years is they just don't compete for the football. And so I see those clips of Devin Fitzgerald making the one-handed grab and Caden Finley doing his, and we've seen Jerome with a couple. And it's nice to see in practice. But I always say, I don't really put too much into those kind of clips. But the flip side is we've seen a lot of those this spring, and that's been an issue. Micah Gilbert a couple years ago had a great spring, but I kept saying, man, he needs to fight for the ball more. Will we see that? I'm very excited about that. Very excited about that.
As am I, definitely. Now, I said we're not going to pay too much attention to CJ Carr, but we will still be paying attention to the quarterback position. More in particular, we're going to be paying attention to that number 2 quarterback battle.
Yeah. I really want to see the growth that Blake Hebert and Noah Grubbs have made. Look, I know it's it's an article we could write and get a lot of clicks and all that kind of stuff. Who's making a move, but at the end of the day, the number 2 quarterback battle will not be decided by anything that happens over the next week. Now, it doesn't mean that guys can't jockey for position and fit by finish the spring off well, and that's why this matters and this is important. But we are entering a phase where, guys could start pulling ahead between now and the fall because, it's not like, okay, after the blue and gold game, we're not going to see Notre Dame. Well, we won't see it, but the Notre Dame players, it's not like D3 football, right? Where when the semester's over, when I was coaching D3, it was even this way at the 1AA level. But like when summer comes, they're gone until fall camp. You might have some kids, that live locally that come work out at the gym and stuff, but like they're gone and we don't see them again until fall camp. Well, that's different here because everybody comes back for summer school and they have summer workouts and stuff like that. So like this is a time that launches you into that period where you might see some guys make some moves, but finishing the spring off strong is going to be important for both Blake Hebert and Noah Grubbs, who are then going to now have to add competition to the battle here in a couple months when Teddy Gerard shows up on campus.
Agreed. Very interested to see how that goes and how it continues to progress over the offseason. I'm with you. Last one on offense, Brian, that we're paying attention to. Is anybody separating themselves in the tight end room? You and I are under the belief that this is a position group that has an exceptionally high ceiling in the offense. But the interesting thing about this room is we couldn't tell you who that's going to be. We have ideas. Cooper Flanagan's back healthy. Ty Washington and Jack Larson are having great off seasons. James Flanagan's taking the jump. Ian Premer's coming in the summer. Preston Prezel's coming along. But
so fast.
It's like we know the ceiling in the room is high, but what's the pecking order? Who starts to separate themselves? Is it a group of guys? Is it one guy? Is it 2, 3? So very interested to see what they look like on Saturday as well.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's really just kind of looking to see if there's any separation. Is Cooper Flanagan showing that he's the guy? Is James Flanagan showing that he's the guy? Or is Ty Washington showing that he's the guy? Is somebody emerging as sort of like, okay, these two are better than everybody else, or these three have really raised their game? Like, or is it there's nobody has separated and it's still going to be a competition? Okay, well, if that's the case, what's the reason for that? Because that could be a good thing or a bad thing. Is the reason because, well, Cooper's struggling with this and James hasn't really done this and Ty hasn't really emerged here and Jack's still struggling here and Breston's 215 pounds. Yeah. Like, okay, that's not great. Or it's like, oh, man, look, we expected Cooper and James to kind of be that guy, and they've been that guy this spring. But, man, Ty is really just doing this. And, Jack Larson just seems to make play after play after play. And boy, Preston Frizel is like 0.2 of a second faster than anybody else we have in the tight end room. I mean, that's the thing is like if somebody hasn't emerged, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It just depends kind of why. But and then it also could be like I'm like, that guy emerged. He's the clear number one, and that's what he did at practice. Like, okay. Like, oh, this ain't good because everybody else is struggling so much. So those things all factor in. But I have a feeling it's going to be a thing where we still don't quite have full separation. But I think there's a couple guys that are starting to create some distance.
Let's flip to the defensive side of the ball here, man. Talk about the front. One of the things we're going to be evaluating with this unit is how's the front looking, talking about aggressiveness, and then also the development in the depth positions. That's going to be huge for this group.
Yeah, it is, Trev. I mean, when you talk about, this position, and we kind of talked about this before the show, it's like there's certain things we know. We know Boubacar at least can play at a certain level. We know Francis Brew can at least play at a certain level, right? If he just repeats what he did last year, he's basically an all ACC caliber player. Okay, I can take that. Like that'll play in this defense. We know there's a certain level that Tion Gray can give you from a big eaten up space standpoint, right? I mean, so we want to see them make jumps, but it's more so about, to me, how's Keon Keeley coming along as kind of that next end. How is Logan Thomas, really showing he can give you X number of snaps or situations? Are the freshmen plugging along enough to where you can say, hey, I feel comfortable saying that guy's going to play in the fall? How's Armel Mukam coming along? And now that he's getting extra reps with Jason Onye out, do any of the other young linemen, D linemen, are they kind of pushing their way into the depth chart, or are just the freshmen and Elijah Hughes kind of separating themselves because they're the experienced guys? I'm very, very curious to see how the depth chart is emerging, how if guys are pushing or not. And then, of course, are we going to watch a defense that's just gap control and on a pass play, it's like there's no hard rush because they're just trying to control the pass lanes? Or Are they controlling the pass lanes while also aggressively going after the quarterback, right? It's not one or the other. Good coach teams do both. So just seeing those kind of things is something I'm very curious about to see from the defensive line in this kind of final practice that we get a chance to see. Is I'm really going to have my eye on obviously the transfers, but Armo Mukum and Chris Burgess. I forgot to mention Chris Burgess. That's another one. Like how are they coming along? We saw Chris Burgess in the first practice, and it's like, dude, like 2 snaps, you're like, he's going to be a dog. And then the other 2 snaps, you're like, yep, that's a guy that's never really played defensive tackle before. You know what I mean? We're going to still see that probably on Saturday. But which one are we seeing more of? We're going to see that in the fall. If he's a starter, we're going to see that in the fall. That's not – but it's like, is it 2 out of 10 snaps, 4 out of 10 snaps, 6 out of 10 snaps, one way or the other? That's going to be a very curious thing for both him and Armel, because I believe, Trevor, and we'll have a lot to talk about this over the summer, those 2 guys are the absolute key to this D-tackle group being like an elite group. Like, I expect the transfers to be very good. I think Jason Onye is going to build on what he did last year. I mean, I think those things are true. Elisha Hughes has become a much more he's just a better player than I thought he was going to be, honestly, coming over from USC. But as far as like taking it to that next level, I would argue that Tion Gray taking a jump from what he was at Oregon, and those 2 players, Christopher Burgess Jr. and Armel Mukum, at least one of them breaking out. If they both do, Katie, bar the door, man. We're going to be fired up to watch this defensive line get after people, man. It's going to be phenomenal. Going to be phenomenal.
Let's kick it back to the secondary on this defense. And another thing we're going to be paying attention to is who's playing where in the secondary. And through some of the practices that we've seen, Brian, it's starting to sort itself out a little bit. And then you obviously have the knowns. Leonard Moore is going to be in the boundary. Tay Johnson and Adnan Shula are going to be your first team safeties. But what does the field corner rotation look like? In some of your practice reports, you've talked about, hey, today Dallas Golden spent a lot of time at field, and it was Christian Gray and Jaden Sanders at nickel. At the practice that I was at, it was kind of like all 3 were just in this triangle rotation of like one was out, one was at field, one was at nickel, and then every couple reps, it would just kind of rotate. What does that start to look like? And then obviously the depth, who plays where. Very interesting.
Yeah. It's really that simple. Right now in the secondary, it's a lot of it's about who plays where. I mean, yeah, of course, I'm looking forward to seeing Aiden Pouncey and Joey O'Brien and Christian Gray and all those guys, but it really comes down to who plays where, Trev. That's going to be such a big part of what I want to learn. Does Christian Gray still split between the 2? Does he play only inside, only outside? What about Jaden Sanders? Those are things that I'm still very much looking forward to seeing.
Last thing on the defensive side of the ball here before we start talking about Notre Dame's schedule. How aggressive are they in team periods with their fronts and their pressures? That's going to be big. And that's something that we just haven't seen yet in practice, and not seen as in like, we don't know if they're going to do it. We just physically haven't seen it. The first full practice we had access to, they didn't have pads on except for helmets. And then the other ones, Brian, you didn't even get a chance to see any team periods. It was special teams drills, indie periods. So very curious to see how that pans itself out.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, Trev. And I don't know that we're going to see a whole lot. We'll see. But I just want to know that, hey, what we saw the last 8 games of the year, 7 games of the year is kind of what this defense is going to be about. That's a big thing for me.
I'm with you. I'm with you completely.
We got a super chat as we wrap this up, Trev. Number one thing, too, we didn't mention this in the chat. We haven't seen any place kicking this spring. I haven't seen Spencer Porath do one thing this spring. I don't know that we'll see that on Saturday, but I remember being at this last year, being at the final practice last year. Last year was the Jersey scrimmage, and you and I came out of that, and Vince came out of that like, this is a problem.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to overreact to a practice, but my man was missing 30-yard field goals by a mile. And it turned out that's kind of what we saw in the season as well. So, yeah, it'll be nice. And we didn't get to see Mitch Jeter the year before because I don't think he was there in the spring. I don't think Mitch showed up until the fall. I don't think. I could be wrong on that. But if we did, I don't remember seeing him. But, yeah, I'm very curious to see what the place kicking situation looks like. if we even get a chance to see it. But super chat from Tom Connor. Thank you so much, Tom. Tom says, will they be going good on good at the practice you will see? I would imagine so to some degree, even if it's ones versus twos on both sides of the ball. It may be like one offense against two defense and then one defense against two offense. That, to me, I still consider good on good when you have the depth that this team has. I mean, think about it. If you're the first team quarterback and you're going against a second team defense, well, who are you seeing? Like Keon Keeley, one of the two transfers. You're probably seing
Luke Talich, Long,
right?
Dallas Golden, Mark Zachary,
right? Aiden Pouncey, exactly. So Joey O'Brien, and if you're watching the second team offense, you're still having to try to make a play against Matty Augustine and maybe Grayson McHugh and Cam Herron and Chris Tarrick, who's back now, Peter Jones, guys like that. Your receivers are what? Mylan Graham, maybe Cam Williams, Bubba Frazier, Elijah Burris. I mean, James Flanagan, Ty Washington, Jonas Walton. You're at the point now where I count that as good on good. What it's not is scout team. It's not the first team offense against all the freshmen and redshirt freshmen. That's not what we're going to see. So to some degree, I think we'll certainly see good on good. Will it be ones versus ones? That don't know. I would imagine we'll see some of that during some of the individual periods when they do one-on-one drills. I imagine we're going to have, because they normally try to have, Leonard Moore going against the top receivers and that kind of thing. But I imagine we'll see some of it. Will we see that in team? That I don't know, Tom. Hope so, but can't tell you for sure.
Brian, up next on the docket here, the Irish Breakdown podcast brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We're talking about Notre Dame's schedule, and not in the normal way that we've talked about it before. Look, Notre Dame's schedule's caught a lot of flack, and people are calling it a cupcake schedule. You've been on shows where people have called it a cupcake schedule. They play nobody. And
the funniest part about that was, and I rather enjoyed that conversation, but he said literally with no qualifiers, they play a cupcake schedule. And I'm like, don't they play your team? And don't they play the team that beat your team last year? I'm just curious. No qualifiers of outside of Miami, you play no one. It just was you play no one. I'm like, a little bit of a cell phone there, I think. It's just wild to hear some of the stupidity that comes from people. Not so much that one, but just some other things I've heard. It's kind of hilarious. But it's just a piling on. Just the lazy, I'm going to say it because everybody else says it. I got nothing to say here. Join a conference. Okay, come on. But at the same time, this is not a gauntlet either. This isn't us coming back saying, no, you're crazy. The schedule's not soft. They play 9 good teams this year. No, we're not doing that either. It's not a tough schedule. And so the conversation that we're going to have here is that matters. If the schedule is as soft as people think it is, let's say it is, Trev. Let's say some teams take step backs. Nobody emerges and this schedule is just really weak. That means that Notre Dame better go 10-0 or 12-0 if they want to get a bye. 11-1, as we saw with Indiana 2 years ago, may not get you a home game. So it does matter. But if the schedule is tougher than we think it's going to be, you get a little bit more respect. It may be the difference between an undefeated Notre Dame being number 1 or number 3. I mean, that's the other thing too, Trev. You could be undefeated and be a 3 seed. I mean, let's just say this, right? Let's say that this season that Ohio State goes down and plays Texas, and Ohio State wins or loses that game by a last-second field goal. Texas, just great game, Trev. Looks a lot like the game they played in 2005. Remember that? The Vince Young game where the tight end for Ohio State drops away. Just great game. Texas wins that game. Let's say it's like that. And then Texas goes the rest of the way, and 2 weeks later they lose at Tennessee. And then they beat Oklahoma on a neutral field. They beat Florida. They beat Ole Miss. They beat LSU on the road. They beat Texas A&M on the road. They beat Missouri on the road. And they've got to win over Ohio State, Oklahoma, Florida, Ole Miss, Missouri, LSU, and Texas A&M. Ohio State loses that really close game to Texas in week 3. Actually, that's week 2. And then the rest of the way, they go on the road, beat Iowa, go on the road and beat Indiana, go on the road and beat USC, beat Oregon at home, beat Michigan at home. And all of a sudden, they're both sitting there, both win their respective conference championships, and they're both sitting there at 12-1. And Notre Dame's 12-0. Miami's the only good team they've played, but Miami's a 3-loss team. Nobody else is ranked. You could make a legitimate case that those two teams are going to should be ranked ahead of Notre Dame. Now all of a sudden Notre Dame's the 3 seed. And now all of a sudden this 12-0 Notre Dame team's got to play the 6 seed in round 2 as opposed to the 7 or 8. That's why it matters that their schedule is better than it looks.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be to varying degrees. And that's what I'm excited to break down in this segment of the show, man, is it's all could look differently. You're going to need teams up at the top to be what we think they're going to be. You're going to need a couple of surprise teams that emerge. And when I mean surprise, I don't mean IU surprise, where it's like, man, I thought they were going to go 6-6 or 5-7. They went 11-1. Their only loss being to Notre Dame. Would be upset if that happened, but that's not the surprise that we're talking about. We're talking about, yeah, dude, we thought they were going to be 4-8, and they're 7-5 right now. That's a quality football team, and a quality win for Notre Dame in the eyes of the committee. A quality win is a win over a team with just a winning record, and so who files into those buckets? And then there's some other teams at the back end, like a Purdue. It's, hey, you just can't be 1-11 or 2-10. Doesn't mean you're going to go 6-6, but can you be 5-7? Can you be 4-8? All of those things start to get under evaluation, and all of that, to your point, means something when you're putting together an entire resume for the playoff committee to sit down and look at the end of the season. It's going to be huge.
That's right. Because somebody in the chat said the only reason to talk about the schedule is for pundits. I'm like, no, we're actually having a real conversation here. The strength of the schedule, not for what morons on Twitter say, but the strength of the schedule is very much going to determine where Notre Dame is evaluated at the end of the season by the playoff committee. If Notre Dame is 10-2 last year and Navy finishes in the top 25, Pitt finishes in the top 25, let's say, kind of thinking through the season, Arkansas was maybe a 8-4 SEC team. Let's say that, just trying to think through a couple good teams. Let's say USC's ends up beating Oregon at the end of the year, and they're a borderline playoff team.
Syracuse doesn't lose Steve Angeli.
They repeat now all of a sudden we're having a conversation about Notre Dame's ranking is going to look very different than what it did at the end of the year. That's why this conversation matters of what we're going to have. So in response to the comment, it says it's a shallow comment, Big, with all due respect. And he says, I'm being honest. The point is to win championships to get to the playoffs. That's what I'm saying. How about you wait like 5 minutes to see the point we're trying to make on the show today before you just say the topic is useless? Because the point we're trying to make is how the schedule is viewed matters towards their ability to get to the playoffs, number one, and then two, have a path that sets up for them to get to the championship. It's the whole point. That's what we saw last year. That's the point we're making. If 4 of Notre Dame's opponents finish in the top 25, does anybody in this chat think that they leave Notre Dame out of the playoffs? No, they don't. They barely left them out now, and Notre Dame had 1 win over a Power 4 team that finished the year ranked in the top 25. 1. Right? So the argument we're making is, okay, I know they didn't play that, but like they played a lot of quality teams and this, that, and the other thing, but they were so dominant, and we're having this argument. And I thought some of Bama's wins over quality wins were very overrated. But if Notre Dame finishes the season and some of the teams are what they were supposed to be, we're not talking about Notre Dame being left out. We're talking about Notre Dame being in. And in the scenario that we laid out before, if Ohio State and Texas both have those one-loss seasons and they win their respective championships, and Notre Dame is 12-0 with 1 win over a ranked opponent, guess what the argument will be going into the playoffs? Well, Notre Dame doesn't deserve the number 1 seed. I'm not talking about argument on Twitter. I'm talking about argument in the committee room. So that's why this matters. That's why how the schedule plays out matters. So the topic today is, why does this topic matter? And then B, what does that look like? What does Notre Dame need to happen? First of all, they all have 1 loss on their schedule. Okay, they lose every week that they play Notre Dame. But outside of that, as Notre Dame fans, as you're watching the season unfold, be paying attention to these teams that they play. because these things will factor into how this team is Notre Dame team is evaluated at the end of the year. And that's what we're going to dive into, Trev. And it starts right here. Number one, the top teams on the schedule have to be top teams at the end of the year. We're talking Miami. We're talking, obviously, BYU. We're talking SMU. And we're talking Navy. They need beat Miami to once again be the class of the ACC. If Miami wins the ACC, or at least plays in the ACC title game, even if they lose to, like, let's say Clemson has a bounce back year and they beat them. Let's say Jeff Brom finally has his team playing with some discipline and they finally turn their potential into production, or Florida State's back to being Florida State or something, and Miami loses in the title game. And they're still a top 12 team. They're still a playoff team, whatever. They need that. They need BYU to once again be a team in November that has an argument to make as being a playoff team. They need SMU. They don't necessarily need SMU to be the 11-1 team they were 2 years ago, but it wouldn't hurt. But what they do need is SMU to be good again, 10-2. Ideal world, perfect world scenario for Notre Dame, Miami and SMU are playing each other for the ACC championship. Would be an ideal scenario for Notre Dame. And if it's not Miami and SMU, then it's Miami and Syracuse, or Miami and Stanford, or Miami or Boston College, Miami or North Carolina, right? But realistically, looking at the schedule, barring some team being way better than we think that they are, they really need those two teams to be sort of the creme de la creme of the ACC. They're two of the top three teams in the ACC, not 8-5, but 7-5, but lost a bunch of out-of-conference games. But like legitimately in the top 25, they need them to both be legit teams. And then, of course, you get down to the end of the schedule. If Navy can continue doing what they've done the last 2 years, now all of a sudden that 10-win Navy team is your fourth best opponent as opposed to that you beat as opposed to your second. I think that matters big time.
Yeah, and we have a real-life example of why this matters. 2024. In April of 2024, if you would have told me that Florida State, coming off of a 13-1 season, was going to have the year that they had, and that included getting DJ Uiagalelei from the portal, that was having receivers like Malik Benson, a running back in Lawrence Toafili. If you told me that they were going to have that type of season, I wouldn't have believed you, because we would have been having a conversation around, okay, Texas A&M in year one of Mike Elko has to be a little bit better. Didn't see Navy and Army both being undefeated at the time that they were going to play. And then you were keeping your fingers crossed that you hope Louisville played better than what some thought that they were going to. Mm-hmm. And that's why this conversation matters. You need, like we talk on game days, you need your dudes to be dudes. When you're looking at Notre Dame's schedule, you need those top-level teams to perform and play like top-level teams.
In 2024, when we look at the schedule and we're talking about the schedule, we're talking about two teams in the schedule that played for the ACC championship the year before, in a year where we're not laughing how those teams made the ACC championship. It was a 10-win Louisville team, and it was a 13-1 Florida State team that played for the championship. Notre Dame played them both. And it's kind of like Indiana in 2024. When you look at Indiana's schedule preseason, you're like, dude, they got to play Washington, Michigan, and Ohio State this year. That's going to be brutal, because Ohio State's always good. And Michigan and Washington were the two teams that played for the title in the year prior. And those teams bombed, which is why, despite Notre Dame going 11-1 and having a better record than Penn State, they stayed behind Penn State. Now, you can say, well, that's because they lost Northern Illinois. No, the Northern Illinois game in week 2 would not have mattered if Florida State was as good as they were the prior year. It would not have mattered if Louisville was as good as they were. They're a 10-2 team. If those are the two teams playing for the ACC championship, it wouldn't have mattered. If Georgia Tech was as good in 2024 as they were in 2025, that would have had a different ring to it. Maybe Notre Dame does jump Penn State. Maybe they do jump Texas at the end, and that creates a different path for them. Who knows? We don't know the answer to that. And so I think those things, Notre Dame's path ended up being fine. I mean, it was fine. I mean, they ended up beating the number 2 seed, but path would have maybe been a little bit easier if they would have played like, SMU in round 1 and then Boise in round 2, like Penn State did. They still would have got Ohio State in the title game, but maybe they wouldn't have been as banged up if they were. And then, that would have meant, maybe Riley Mills doesn't tear his AC. There's all these different things you can do. So these things factor into that, Trev. And so how your schedule plays out is going to impact where you're seated at the end of the tournament when you do get into the championship. And it also, there's a world in which a year ago I'd have said, guys, 11-1 Notre Dame's not getting left out. Stop with the paranoia. But I can't say that anymore after what we saw last year, after the complete screw job that we saw last year. I can't tell you guys definitively, because what was my argument? The committee's always been pro Notre Dame. And until last year, they were. And then last year, they were pro Notre Dame in regard to let's create a storyline to get people to watch, but we're going to screw that team over. And that's not just me saying that. Dan Patrick said that on his show, that he was told before, like during the November, that he was told by somebody that was connected to the committee that I think they're going to screw Notre Dame over, that they're just doing all this for rankings. So that's not just me saying that, some Notre Dame guy. But if those teams handle their business and then you handle your business, now all of a sudden we're having a very different conversation. If Notre Dame's 12-0 and Miami is in the playoff again, and they're playing SMU for the SEC championship, like we saw 2 years ago with Clemson and SMU both getting in. If BYU once again is a 10-2 team that's hovering around playoff capability, maybe even playing in the Big 12 championship again, something they didn't do 2 years ago but did last year. Navy's, again, a legit 10-plus win team. Now, all of a sudden, we're not talking about it. Notre Dame at 12-0 is the number one seed. You got 4 top 25 wins minimum, maybe 2 to 3 top 15 wins on their resume. We're not having the conversation of, does a one-loss Ohio State, a one-loss Texas, a one-loss Georgia, who may win their league? One of those, the Big Ten, let's say Oregon's 12-1. They win the Big Ten. Same story. We're not discussing whether or not those teams should be ranked ahead of Notre Dame in the final polls, even if Notre Dame runs the table. And if they're as good as we think they are, then now Notre Dame has a much better ranking if they have a slip up, if they go 11-1. Now we're not kind of in Indiana territory from 2 years ago, where 11-1 Notre Dame against the soft schedule and lost to the only good team they played all year. Now all of a sudden they're going on the road to play somebody in round one of the playoffs. So the top teams, the most important thing is those top teams have to be in the postseason around where people view them in the regular season or in the preseason. It's imperative.
Agreed completely. I'd go as far to say, and this is just my opinion, be curious to get your thoughts on this one too, before we kind of move on to the next tier of teams on Notre Dame's schedule. The one team that I believe kind of holds the key to all of this in my mind is BYU, for a handful of different reasons. One, they were the team that directly replaced USC on the schedule. So this was the one that a lot of Notre Dame fans, us included, talked about, yeah, USC wants to leave and run away from this rivalry. Well, they just got a bump in strength and schedule adding BYU. That is true for what the track record recently has been for Kalani Sitake and BYU. Here's why I think they kind of hold the key. You need all of them. But for BYU, the story is more so going to be, compared to Miami and SMU, how do they finish their season? I think that there's a level of variance, like relative floors, that we're going to see from Miami and SMU. I truly believe that. I mean, with SMU, they start their season off tough. They're on the road against Florida State. They're home against UC Davis, and then they're on the road against Louisville. Let's paint out doomsday scenario for SMU. You could still talk about how Notre Dame is gearing up to face a team on senior day that is fresh off of a 7-game win streak with what their schedule looks like after that. Miami, there's a good chance they're undefeated going into that game in November against Notre Dame. Yep. But I look at BYU's schedule. After Notre Dame, they're on the road against UCF. That should be a win. After that, they're home against Arizona State, on the road against Utah, home against Baylor, on the road against Kansas, and then home against Cincinnati. I would argue that BYU kind of holds a little bit of key to this narrative overall of your top teams being top teams coming true. FanDuel has their over-under right now at 8.5 wins. I think they need to more than surpass that and be around that 10-win mark. And for them, it's going to be more about how you finish. I think that's going to be huge.
I think BYU is an interesting team, Trev, because you look at their schedule, and it's not easy by any stretch, but there's no Texas Tech on the schedule, which matters. You know, there's no Kansas State. They have Utah on the road. They have Arizona State at home, and they have Iowa State at home, and then they're at TCU. They're home against Arizona. So of the 5 best teams they play from the Big 12, I would say Arizona, TCU, Arizona State, Utah, and then it's kind of debating whether it's Iowa State, whether it's Baylor, Cincinnati, you know, that kind of team. Unless you say it's Kansas, 3 of the 5 best teams they play in their conference are at home. And one of the 2 teams they play on the road, I don't know how good TCU is going to be this year. Like, we'll see. There's a world in which like you said, Trev, they come into that Notre Dame game undefeated. If they have one loss, then it's imperative that they at least go 1-1 against Arizona State and Utah and then have no other upsets. And then they're 9-3. They're a top 20-ish team. And, like that gives you some benefit of the doubt. But if they lose to TCU, I mean, if you're Notre Dame, how you want TCU season to play is it matters where they are at the end of the year more than where they are ranked when Notre Dame plays them. So if BYU is going to lose a second game, you want it to be early to like a TCU. You want it to be an upset in week 2 to Arizona. And then you want them to go on a run and beat Arizona State at home, beat Utah on the road. And then now all of a sudden they just steadily climb up the rankings, right? Or, I mean, the other thing is they dominate the Big 12 and they're 11-1 playing in the Big 12 championship, but then only lost being there. And that's the ideal scenario, but just looking at it practically. The SMU schedule fascinates me, Trevor, because when you look at their schedule, they've got to go 1-1 in their first 2 road games. They open the season at Florida State. That's a fascinating game to me because we don't know what Florida State's going to be. And then 2 weeks later, you play at Louisville. I would much rather play Louisville in the first 3 weeks than the last 3 weeks of the season. Breaking in a new quarterback, breaking in a new offensive line, new receivers. Like by November, Jeff Brom's probably going to have those guys rolling. That's just kind of been Louisville's deal in passion. I mean, they'll have those weird slip-ups. They always have those weird slip-ups. But, like, their offense really starts cooking as we kind of get deeper into the season. And so, with one exception, when they had Miller Moss at quarterback. But you and I both saw that come a little bit. But, like, the only loss they had in November, November of 2024, they blew out Pitt. They blew out Kentucky. They blew out Clemson. And the only loss they had was to Stanford, which is a terrible loss. But they scored 35 points in that game. It was like, you know what I mean? Like, that's just kind of how they've been. So if SMU splits that series and goes 1-1 or, goodness gracious, goes 2-0, which is possible. It's possible. Their schedule after that is Missouri State at home, Boston College at home, Virginia at home, Cal at home, Virginia Tech at home, Wake Forest at home, and mixed in there's at Syracuse. So if they just hold serve at home, and then they can somehow beat Syracuse on the road, there's a world in which I won't be shocked if SMU's undefeated. But if they have a loss to one of those 2 teams, and you can't lose to Syracuse. But let's say they do drop to Syracuse. Okay, you lose at least to a team that Notre Dame has to play, and that probably means Syracuse is one of those bounce-back teams this year, which we'll talk about later. But SMU's schedule sets up very nicely for them to be a top 25 team. I mean, look at their schedule. Who's not on it? No Miami. No Clemson. No Duke, who played in the conference championship game last year. You do have Virginia Tech, but you get them at home. You do have Virginia, who was a very good team last year, but you get them at home. You get Florida State, who maybe could be a bounce-back team, but you get them in week 1. You got to play a good Louisville team, but you get them early, which is when you want to play them. So the schedule sets up nicely for them, and they've got something that you want for a team that's going to compete for a championship, and that's a veteran quarterback. What did both teams that ended up playing in the ACC last year have? They had veteran quarterbacks. Now, they were both transfers, but they had veteran quarterbacks, and that's obviously something that SMU will have. So, Trev, I think BYU and SMU are the ones that I'm focusing on here. I actually really like this Miami team, and we've talked about that before. I think Miami's going to be very good. They have a challenging, couple games coming into the Notre Dame game, but their schedule also sets up nicely for them to be undefeated when they play Notre Dame. I think they might have a loss. We'll see. They play at Stanford. That should be a dominant win. They've got Florida at home, Florida A&M at home, Wake Forest on the road, Central Michigan at home. That's interesting. They do lead the state of Florida twice in September. That's amazing for them. They play Florida State at home, Pitt at home, at North Carolina. That's their schedule before Notre Dame, with one exception. October 3rd, they play at Clemson. So unless they just get beat by a team they have no business getting beat by, worst case scenario, Miami comes into Notre Dame Stadium on November 7th with 1 loss. And that's assuming they lose to a Clemson team who's coming off of a 7-6 season. We'll talk about them later. There's a world in which, and the reason that we talk about this matters, those games, unlike last year, are all second half of the year for Notre Dame. Their games 7 through 12 is when they play BYU, SMU, and Miami. And I think it might have been Andrew Gilmore in the chat mentioned this, but like if those those Miami and SMU are what we think they are or hope that they are, and Notre Dame needs them to be, the one thing that Notre Dame will have this November that they didn't have the last 2 Novembers are 2 huge marquee top 10 to 15 teams in their schedule. What's the best Power 4 team they've beat at home the last 2 Novembers? Or beat at all? It's like Pitt, who dropped out of the top 25 after Notre Dame beat them. That's it. The only other ranked teams they've played in November are Navy and Army. USC they played in October at home, and then when they played them in November the year before, they were unranked. They were a 6-5 football team. That is huge because now that we're not having to sit like, hey, remember that game we played back in September at Texas A&M, or at Louisville? Now it's like, dude, now you are having some of those big marquee games. You might have the biggest game in the month of November. That's why it's also important that those games matter, Trev, because while all these other teams are playing these big conference games against ranked opponents, Notre Dame's saying, hey, look what we did. These are both also games played after the committee's first rankings. Those last 2 are, which is huge. BYU comes out like about a week. The game is about a week or 2 before the rankings come out. And then obviously Miami SMU will be after. I'm pretty sure. I'm actually going to look up when is the first rankings for the college football playoff in 26. I wonder if they have that out. I want to
say historically it's been like the following Tuesday after the first Saturday of November, because I remember being upset at their performance against Boston College, saying like, yo, this was the last chance you had to make an impression on the committee, and you beat Boston College 25-10.
So I wonder if it's going to be right before the Miami game.
Yeah.
Because the November's got that weird month where the first Saturday's not till the 7th. And so I wonder if this year it's because I doubt that they're only going to do 4 weeks of rankings before the final one, right? But it'll either be before or the week after the Miami game. I would imagine the week right before. So your first ranking comes out and then boom, Notre Dame, Miami, or second ranking that comes out, it's boom, Notre Dame and Miami. So I'm very curious to see kind of how that plays out. Because this is one of those years, Trev, where the season has a little bit of a later start. We don't have the late August, September 1st kind of start date. It's September 6th. 5th and 6th is the first weekend this year. So I'm curious how that's going to impact when the rankings come out. But and ultimately, Trev, the rest of the stuff we'll work through quickly. But at the end of the day, when I gave the 3 bullet points, top teams must stay on top, need a surprise jump, bad teams need to be better. There's only one that was in all caps, and it was top teams must stay on top. Because at the end of the day, if those teams aren't good, they don't care that, oh, BC had a nice bounce back 6-6 season. Purdue, boy, they're really showing growth under Barry Odom. They're 5-7. Hey, look, North Carolina made it to a bowl game this year. It won't matter if they beat a bunch of 6 to 7 win teams, 8 win teams. If none of them are ranked, Miami's not good. They're, that could hurt the schedule big time. And so that's why. But if all those teams are just what they were last year, it doesn't matter if those top 4 teams remain those top 4 teams. That's the absolute huge part of the schedule for Notre Dame. And we're not talking about this too, Trev. If Navy is what we hope they are, it could set up a stretch in mid to late October into November where Notre Dame plays 3 straight ranked opponents. Because this is Navy's schedule. They play Towson, Florida Atlantic, UAB, Air Force, Tulsa, UTSA, and North Texas before they play Notre Dame. If they're undefeated, that could set up a world in that October 31st game where 4 out of 5 games for Notre Dame are ranked opponents late in the second half of the year. So that's why these 4 matter more than anything. If that's a reality where Notre Dame's last 6 games, I should say, right? So it's 4 out of 5, and then game 6 is at Syracuse. If nothing else happens, but BYU's ranked and they're a 10+ win team, Navy's a 10+ win team, Miami's a 10+ team, SMU's a 10+ win team. That means in your last 6 games, you're playing 4 teams that are going to win, that are going to be 10+ win teams in the regular season. Ranked teams for your last 6 games. At that point in time, it doesn't matter if Syracuse is also good or Purdue's better or whatever. If that happens, then the rest doesn't really matter. But if that doesn't happen, then they will need some help in some of those other areas.
Very curious to see how that pans out. I'm with you. That's going to be a very important stretch. There's a world, Brian, and I'm not going to predict it, but there's a world where 3 of the 4 potentially, depending on how it shakes out, 4 of those 4 teams are playoff teams. Mm-hmm. I think you and I both think Miami's going to be a playoff team this year.
Oh, no doubt. I'm more certain of it this year than I was last year, and I thought they had a shot to be a playoff team last year.
Same. It wouldn't shock me if BYU is a playoff team this year. They were almost a playoff team last year with a true freshman quarterback. And I don't think Texas Tech is going to be as good complete as a team as they were this past season.
And they don't have to play them twice.
Exactly. There's a world Navy's the G5 bid. And if SMU is what we think that they are and play Miami potentially in the ACC championship game, they could get in like they did in 2024 as an at-large. Not willing to predict it. That's not me saying that Notre Dame's schedule is actually secretly a gauntlet because there could be 4 playoff teams on there because they get 3 of those 4 at home. Like, and it, that is a factor.
It doesn't make it a gauntlet. It makes the end of the season a gauntlet.
Yeah.
But people say, well, you had a half the year to get warmed up for that gauntlet, and it'll be true.
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, it won't matter. If those 4 teams are good, then it's guaranteed that Notre Dame at 11-1 gets in. And it's probably hosting. If Notre Dame's 12-0, it all but assures that they're going to be ranked ahead of any one-loss Power 4 champion. I'll contend that a 12-0 Notre Dame team should always be ranked behind a 13-0 Big Ten or SEC champion, assuming that team has a real schedule. Like not necessarily Indiana from last year, but like Texas, or Texas from 2 years ago or last year, I should say. But 2 years ago, Georgia goes undefeated. I don't care what Notre Dame does in the regular season. Like, Georgia should have been number 1. Like this year, if Ohio State's 13-0, I don't care how good those 4 teams are because they can match your top 4, and then they're 5, 6, 7, and 8 or better. You know what I mean? Like there's worlds in which that's true, and they have to play the conference championship game. So I can live with that. But it does ensure that if Notre Dame is undefeated and those other teams have a loss, Notre Dame will be the number 1 seed in the playoff. I think we can safely say that if those 4 teams are that good, that's true, and it doesn't matter about the rest of the schedule. But I'd say that's kind of a big if, Trev. We've said the word if probably about 40 times in the last 10 minutes. If Miami's this, if SMU is this, if BYU is this, if Navy is this. And with all honesty, we think that about Miami, but Miami has to show that they can just continue to be good. They had 2 good years in a row. Sound familiar? Remember that other team in Florida that had 2 good years in a row in 22 and 23, had a really good 10-3 season in 2022, and then they break out the next year, go 13-1, 13 on the regular season, should have been in the playoffs. And then that team, Florida State, goes 2-10 the next year. I'm not saying Miami's going to go 2-10, but like there's still a lot to prove there. Just like we said that about Notre Dame last year. It's nice that Marcus had a couple good years, but can he build on it? Can he keep rolling? So they got to prove that. I mean, was BYU a nice 2-year jump where they just happened to have the roster just kind of came together perfectly for them to make that run? Or is this just, are they going to go revert back to looking more like the 5-7 team from 2023? Same thing with SMU. Are they the 9-4 team from last year or the 11-2 team from the year before? That's going to matter. Because if their 4th loss is Notre Dame in November, even if they were ranked before that game, they're Pitt. That's what they are. They're Pitt. So it really is imperative. And now if we're like, okay, let's argue that how important that Navy win is for Notre Dame. Now you're in a little bit of a pickle from a seeding standpoint. So if it doesn't all go right, then that's where they need that next group of teams to you need somebody to make a surprise jump or a bounce back in the case of Syracuse. The teams we have in mind here, Trevor, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Syracuse, and North Carolina. I think you need at least one of those teams to be a surprisingly good team, like an 8+ caliber win team. And if the more of the top 4 group that aren't good, the more of these teams you need to be even better, because then it can kind of overall raise the quality of your schedule or the strength of your schedule.
Yeah, all four of those teams, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Syracuse, and North Carolina, are all coming off of losing seasons, and some more devastatingly losing seasons like a Syracuse than some because they had the massive injury. You need one of those. I know a lot of people think it's going to be Syracuse because you get Steve Angeli back, which is going to be a huge boost, but I'm here to tell you right now, the talent surrounding him this year is not the same as what it was last year with Jonte Cook and Justice Ross Simmons and Daryl Gill. It'll look a little bit different, but having Steve back is going to be a boost. I've been high on Wisconsin this past offseason. Now, again, I just think they're going to be better than 4-8. I don't think they're going to be a sneaky contender for the Big Ten championship because they got Colton Joseph.
It's 5-7 is better than 4-8. You know what I mean, yes. Trev? Like, is it 5-7 improved, 6-6 improved, 8-4 improved? That's going to matter.
Absolutely. And some of it's just going to be if you are 6-6 or 7-5, what did you look like in those 5 losses? Or those 6 losses? Did you beat 6 teams, 2 of those being G5 or FCS teams that you just should have beat, and then you lose by double digits against every meaningful opponent? Or are you battling? Are you losing some of these games? Like, if Wisconsin had more games, like more losses, like how they lost to Oregon in the last 2 years, it'd be a little bit more respectable. It's like, yeah, they went 5-7. That's an absolute gauntlet, and their largest margin of defeat was 11. But it can't be, yeah, they went 5-7 and 4-8 in back-to-back years, and their lowest loss margin was their loss to Oregon, and it's not great. So that's going to be huge. I'm with you. You need one of those 4 teams to step up.
And I would argue if 2 of them can be, I think at least 2 of them need to be improved to really hammer that thing home. I mean, and you look at like 2 of the teams that we're looking at here, Trev, you could argue maybe 3 of the teams. Although I don't want one of the teams to actually have a big win. But if you're looking at, for example, Michigan State. For Michigan State go 8-4, if we assume that they're going to lose to Notre Dame, let's say they go 8-4 this year. Well, they're going to have some decent wins on there, right? I mean, they're going to have, I mean, there's a chance that they don't have to, but there's a chance they could have some decent wins on there. They play at Michigan. They play Washington at home. They play Oregon at home. You know, they play Illinois at home, Nebraska at home. Like, there's some opportunities for them to say, yeah, they were 8-4, but hey, did you watch them? Notre Dame beat them by 30 in September, and they took Oregon down to the wire. You know, and yeah, Oregon came back and won, but man, Michigan State gave them a problem. So that, you know, think about what that means for Notre Dame. You know, those things all factor in and matter when we're having these conversations about schedule. You know, like, hey, they upset Washington, who beat Oregon and who's in contention against Notre Dame. You know, like, for a seed or something like that, or for a spot. So I think all those things factor in, Trev, just to the overall quality. And then beyond just the schedule, I would think it's better for Notre Dame to have some of those teams be improved so you can be tested, so you can have a better sense of who you are. I mean, forget for a second what it means for Notre Dame's paper resume. If Wisconsin's a better team, a grittier team, a tougher team, a more competent team, if Michigan State is, if Purdue will, you know, in the next category, the bad teams need to be better. That's sort of the final category that we're looking at, Trev, is the teams that are bad. Stanford, BC, Purdue, and Rice. You need some of them to just not be as bad. Don't be 2-10 bad. Be 4-8, 5-7 bad. You know, like, if BC can bounce back to what they were 2 years ago, that'd be huge for Notre Dame, just the overall depth of the schedule. But the other part of it too, Trev, is practically speaking for Notre Dame, it's imperative that they go into BYU saying, hey, we've had some tests. None of those teams were on our level, but we had to show up and be ready to play against Michigan State because they're a lunch pail team now under Pat Fitzgerald. You know, this North Carolina team, boy, Bill Belichick's got them rolling. They got some athletes. They did well in the portal, and they've got some stuff we got to be concerned about schematically, or they've got some athletes that we've got to be concerned about that it's going to help us be prepared when we go play BYU and Miami or SMU. Same thing with Wisconsin, boy. That looked like a vintage Wisconsin offensive line. It really tested our defense. Now we have some things we know in week 1 we got to work on. Where if Notre Dame just kind of goes out there and just out-talents those teams and just kind of cruises, maybe some of your warts aren't, and everybody has warts. Indiana last year had warts. LSU 2019 had some warts. Miami 01 had some warts. Florida State 13 had some warts. But the key is you want to get them exposed early as you can. Florida State didn't realize about their warts until the first half of the national championship game in 2013, right? Well, LSU had some of their warts exposed in week 2 against Texas. And then that gave them some stuff to work on. They knew, hey, we got to get better here. We got Bama, we got 2 months before we got to go to Tuscaloosa. We better get this figured out. And so I think those things matter, Trev. They matter quite a bit. So practically speaking, if some of those teams are better and improved, especially Wisconsin and Michigan State, who you play early, maybe a Purdue, that's going to help you be a little bit more battle tested when you do get to November. I don't want a gauntlet in September because October, November is going to be potentially a gauntlet because of the way that they're scheduled. Like if they had, one of those teams in week 1, one of them in week 4, one of them week 9, one of them in week 13, that's not a gauntlet because they're spread out. It's perfectly scheduled. But what I'm saying is, like, in a matter of 5 games, 4 of those could be top 20 teams. That's a really tough schedule for a small period. But then it's like, yeah, but you played nobody for the first 2 months. But then also, do you get slipped up out in Provo because this is the first time you've played grown men all season, where you're just not used to we thought we were a physical team because we just overwhelmed these bad teams. But man, we didn't realize that we weren't there yet until it was too late in Provo. That's why I think those things are very important. Somebody in the chat just made Andrew Gilmore two good points today. But like that's kind of what happened to Texas Tech last year. They played no one in their league that could match them athlete for athlete and hang with them in the trenches. There was nobody that could go to battle with them in the trenches. Then they play an Oregon team that was better than they were in the trenches, and they had no answers. And had better athletes on defense than they had on offense, and they had no answers. None. But they didn't find out till they got to the playoffs. You hope that that's not the case for Notre Dame. So that's, I think, as we kind of evaluate it, those are the things that we need to see, Trev, right? Like, we need the best team on the schedule to be the best teams on the schedule. You need the teams in the middle. You need some guys to make a surprise jump. Another team that's interesting too, Trevor, that could really make the finish interesting. What if Syracuse looks like they did 2 years ago again? Now, all of a sudden, your finish, your last 6 games is over. Let's look at this real quick. Just use preseason rankings, and then we'll add Syracuse in there. It's at BYU, number 11. And I'm using, I don't know what format they're using, but FBS Schedules has rankings on these teams. So I'm just using these. At BYU, number 11. Navy on a neutral field, 10-win team from last year. Home against number 8 Miami. Boston College, home against number 17 SMU. And then let's say they're at Syracuse, who let's say is 9-2 going into that game. Because they were a 9-3 team in the regular season the year before, correct? They ended at 10-3. They were 8. They ended up, but let's say their third loss ends up being to Notre Dame. Now all of a sudden you're playing a 9-2 Syracuse team. Guess what, folks? If Syracuse is 9-2, they'll be ranked in the top 25 because they play Louisville, SMU, Clemson, NC State, North Carolina, Virginia, UConn, Pitt, Cal before that. So if they, let's say they. And Clemson, SMU, and Louisville are all at home, and they've been a much better home team in recent years than a road team. Now, all of a sudden, you're like, okay, well, if they lose, let's say at Pitt, so between at Pitt, at Virginia, home against Louisville, home against SMU, home against Clemson, at NC State, if they lose 2 of those games, let's say they lose early at Pitt, and let's say they lose at home for the sake of Notre Dame, they lose at home to SMU. That means they have a win at Virginia, home against Louisville, home against Clemson, and at NC State. Like, even an 8-3 Syracuse team has at least 2 really good wins there. Now, all of a sudden, that adds a little bit more to the schedule. But if they're like a 9-2 team coming into that, now we're talking about yet another top 25 team. I don't know that Syracuse has the manpower, to your point, to be that team this year, Trev, but, stranger things have happened.
I mean, yeah, to your point, I didn't think that they had the manpower in 2024 to be a 9-win football team in the regular season. I didn't think Kyle McCord was going to be the guy that goes in there and turns it around. But, we've been wrong before. I've been wrong before. So it's interesting. There's some teams in there that's, I would put a lot of my chips on Michigan State and Wisconsin. A couple different reasons. You get the name brand in there. You're going to get more recognition for beating an improved Wisconsin team than you are an improved Rice team. You're going to get more recognition for beating an improved Michigan State team than you are over Boston College. Like that's just how it's depicted. And we can sit here until we're blue in the face and talk about how, no, like this Boston College team is improved. They're better in the trenches. They're better in the, but that's not going to resonate with people the same as we just beat a gritty Michigan State team in the Big Ten that also gave this team a run for their money and this team a run for their money and upset this team. It just won't carry the same weight. So my money's on those two, but out of those final 8 teams that we talked about, you need a couple of them to rise to varying degrees, but I'm with you completely. Going to be very interesting to see how that shakes out.
Yeah, I think the point about Michigan State and Wisconsin, I don't know how much credit Notre Dame is going to get for beating a good Wisconsin team if they're good by the end of the year. But and same with Michigan State, but it goes back to what we said earlier. If those teams are better, they may not get credit for it, but it'll make Notre Dame better. And that's the important piece to the conversation. It makes them better. It gives them that physical test. And I'm really hoping that Michigan State is much improved because that game's closer to the BYU game. Like if they're just like good in the trenches, I don't care if they have no skill, because BYU's not going to threaten you with skill. BYU's going to threaten you with punching you in the mouth, that scheming you up. That's why I think that one would be a challenge.
Brian, getting into the final part of the Irish Breakdown podcast brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We're talking about the Notre Dame Clemson series, that 12-year home and home that they scheduled. What was it, last year that got finalized and became official? And we're going to talk about the impact that it's going to have, because obviously at the time it was, hey, this is a major player. We believed, especially at the time, Clemson was just fresh off of making the playoffs. They won the ACC again. Their roster was on paper one of the best in the country, and you just go out and you sign a 12-year home and home with them outside of the confines of the current the current ACC deal that they had. And then last season happens, they go 7-6. There's questions about Dabo. So now we're kind of at this pivotal point of what does this Clemson potential rivalry bring to the table, this 12-year home and home, and what does Notre Dame need from Clemson? Kind of sticking with the theme of, last segment, we talked about what Notre Dame needs from their 2026 schedule. Now, beyond, what are they going to need from one of the biggest names on their schedule over the next 12 years? And that's Clemson.
The interesting reality of Notre Dame's schedule moving forward is there's no Power 4 rival left on the schedule that's guaranteed to be on it every year. There's no USC guaranteed to be on it. Maybe USC comes back in 2 years, Trev, and this is a moot point. Maybe Notre Dame and Michigan or Michigan State, schedule some kind of, long-term rivalry in the next. Maybe that happens. If it's Michigan State, that's great, but what are the odds that Michigan State's going to return to the Mark D'Antonio era? Michigan, maybe there's a better odds that happens, but again, it'd be the same thing. We'd be talking about Michigan, like how good are they going to be? But with no USC, with no Michigan, and with no Stanford, there's no potential Power 4 rival that could emerge as a good opponent. The only team that you have guaranteed to be on your schedule for the next 10 years is Navy. And so you've got this deal with Clemson. They signed it, like you were correct, Trev, is little less than a year ago. It was in early May is when they signed it. So we're a few weeks from the first anniversary of that signing. And to your point, Notre Dame was fresh off playing for the national championship, and Clemson was fresh off winning the ACC and playing in the college football playoffs as part of a string of like their worst season in the previous 15, 20 years was like the 9-4 season from 2023. That was their down, in which they beat Notre Dame. You know what I mean? Like that was their down year. Well, things are different now. To your point, they're 7-6, and there's no clear evidence that they're on the verge of bouncing back. That doesn't mean it can't happen. They're in a better place right now to figure stuff out than what Indiana was in 2023 when Kurt Cignetti arrived. You know what I mean? Like in today's era, you can turn things around quickly. The problem for Clemson is they're not really engaging in the things that allow you to turn your program around quickly. Dabo is a little bit more willing to engage in the portal. I think the thing that happened this year with the kid from Cal, where he signs with Clemson and he's already in class. He's taking classes at Clemson. And all of a sudden, just like that, he's like, yeah, I'm leaving to go to Ole Miss. And then, of course, Dabo went public with the criticism, as he should have. He was right to to be critical of how that went down. I fully support, him doing that. But when you look at it, Trev, it's like, okay, you're in a situation now where we don't know what Clemson's going to be. And you say, well, why does it matter? Look at what they have on the schedule. Well, a couple reasons why it matters. Number one, if Clemson is regularly on the schedule and they're consistently good, so like 9-4 in their worst year, like let's kind of, maybe we should define what we mean by Clemson rebounds. I don't think Notre Dame needs Clemson to get back to being what they were from like 2013 to 2020. I don't think Notre Dame needs them to be 11-2. Like, this is where they were 2013 to 2020. 11-3, 10-2, 11-2, 10-3, 14-1 national runners up, 14-1 national champs, 12-2 college football playoff team, top 4 team, 15-0 national champs, 14-1 national runners up, 10-2 college football. They don't need them to be that every year, but they need them to have some years where they are a legit title contender. But it could be a bunch of years like they were from 2011 to 2014, 10-4, 11-2, 11-2, 10-3, where, they were really good. They weren't an elite team, but they were a really good team. Or even worst case scenario, if they're just like they were from 2020 to 2024. You had a 10-2 season where they make the college football playoffs. They get smoked in the semifinals, but they're a semifinal team, or you go out the next year and you're 10-3, you're a top 15 team. You're not elite, but you're top 15. Next year, 2022, you're 11-3. You lose the Orange Bowl, but you still finish top 15. Next year, you drop down to 24th or to 9-4, but you're still the 20th ranked team in the country. The next year, you bounce back, you win the ACC, you go 10-4, you make it to the college football playoff. If that's all Clemson is the next 12 years, that's perfectly fine for Notre Dame. If they do get back to being what they were from like 15 to 20, that's okay too, because we expect Notre Dame to be that kind of team. And you can afford to lose that game as long as it's a good game. And it's one of those games that makes you better, because now you've gone against another elite team and you now know after week 4 or 5 or sometimes 1, 10, this is an area where we got to improve if we're going to go make that run. But then there's years you're going to beat them. And it's like, oh, now you've got that big win on your resume. You've got that win over number 1 Clemson, or like in 2022, number 4 Clemson in November. You get those kind of wins on your resume. And I think it's huge for Notre Dame. And it gives you a consistent gauge for where you are as a program. It gives you a consistent top 15 caliber team that you can just say every year, we know we're going to have at least one really good team on our schedule, which then makes scheduling a little bit easier in future years. So I do think there's a lot of practical reasons why Notre Dame needs Clemson to getting back to being a big dog in the ACC. Even if they don't get all the way back to the Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson days, they at least need them to be what they were in the Taj Boyd days, or from like 20 to 24, where they're perennially a 10-win team that finishes in the top 15. That's imperative. You have to be able to Pete Bavacqua has to be able to say, look, we got Clemson on the schedule for the next 12 years. We can work with that. When we're thinking about who we're going to schedule in 2031 to fill out our schedule, we don't have to say, boy, we might want to try to get Georgia, because right now we don't have anybody on the schedule that's going to be any good, and we're not sure what this team is going to be or that team is going to be. And we'll go through future schedules and we'll make more of a point. But I think that's the foundation of this, is you have to feel comfortable knowing we got at least one big dog on our team every year. At least one. And then if some other teams that are on the schedule end up also still being good, that's even better. But you have to have at least one big dog, and a consistent big dog. A big dog that you can say, we know that we've got to get better here because Clemson hurts us in that area every year. And when you start hurting them, you're like, okay, now we know we have variety. We know we got a good offensive line. How do you know? Did you see what we did to Clemson's defensive line? Yeah. Okay. You're legit. How do you know your secondary is good? Did you see us lock down Clemson's receivers? Like, that's where Clemson used to be. And how do we know that the 2018 corners were good? Look at what they did to the Clemson receivers. They could do nothing on Troy Pride and Julian Love. And it wasn't until Julian Love got hurt that they could do anything. That's how you know how good that cornerback room was. So I think that's a big part of it, Trevor, is just having that You know this Power 4 team is going to be on your schedule every year, and you can chalk up that's going to be a top 25 opponent. That's going to be a top 15 opponent on your schedule every year. That's important to have. It's really important to have for a team that wants to remain independent and be able to guarantee as best they can that we're going to have a quality schedule, which right now you don't have because USC's been so because that's what's hurt Notre Dame the last decade. If Notre Dame was playing USC and Stanford every year like they have in the past, and Stanford was just like they were in the end of the Jim Harbaugh era, beginning of the David Shaw era, if they were like what they were, not even the vintage Pete Carroll years, just the 07 to 09 Pete Carroll years, nobody's talking about Notre Dame's schedule being soft this year. You got Miami, USC, and Stanford. Good luck. You know what I mean? Like, good luck making the playoffs there, Notre Dame. And then if Notre Dame goes 2-1 or 3-0, you're like, dude, Notre Dame's legit. Like, but those teams have been kind of bad most years. And even the good USC teams, Notre Dame's steamrolled the last couple times they've played them. You know, 2 of the last 3 times they've played them. You know, they had the loss to them out in 2022, but they played a top 10 USC team in 23 and destroyed them. They played I think they were 11th, but a one-loss team in 2017, and Notre Dame destroyed them. So that's been the issue for Notre Dame, Trev, is those 2 teams sucking has been a big reason why we've seen the inconsistency from Notre Dame's schedule over the years. In 2021, we all mocked Notre Dame's schedule, soft schedule outside of Cincinnati. It's true. But that's because Wisconsin stunk and they used to be good. It's because Stanford was down. It's because USC was down. It's not because Notre Dame intentionally played a soft schedule. Now, did Jack Swarbrick take steps to weaken the schedule for Brian Kelly? Yes, he did. But he was aided in that attempt by Stanford and USC not being good. It's no coincidence that Brian Kelly struggled from 2010 to 2017 to put consistently good teams on the schedule when Stanford was kicking his butt most years. Yeah. Prior to 2018, Brian Kelly had a losing record against Stanford. They lost in 10, lost in 11, beat him in 12, lost in 13, beat him in 14, lost in 15, lost in 16, lost in 17. They were 2-5 against Stanford his first 7 years in Notre Dame. In USC, they were having more success with, but not as much as they have in recent years. You beat them in 10, lost in 11, beat them in a close game in 12, beat them in a close game in 13, got blown out in 14, beat them in 15, got blown out in 16, beat them in 17. So you had a winning record, but you were 5-3. So you were, what's the math here, Trev? 7 and 10 in those in that stretch against USC and Stanford? No, that isn't right, because they played each
7 and 8.
Yes, yeah. So you went 2-5 against Stanford, and then 5-3. So yeah, 7 and 8. And that's still not right, because it shouldn't be an even year. So hold on, this is gonna.
I mean, if you go 2-5 and 5-3, that's 7.
My point is, I'm not counting the same number of years. I'm missing a year from one of them. So it would be Stanford. We're taking a year from. So let's take a year off for Notre Dame. So we're going to go US to 17. That's what we did for Stanford, right? Went to 17. So 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So hold on, I'm missing. So 2010, they lost to Stanford. 2011, they lost to Stanford. Beat them in 12, lost in 13, beat them in 14, lost in 15, lost in 16, lost in 17. So they were 2-6 against Stanford, and then 5-3 against USC.
7 and 9.
So 7 and 9 against your 2 California rivals in that stretch. Well, 17 was the last year that Stanford was really good.
Yeah. And
USC has had a couple good years since 2017, but they've been mostly down. And voila, Brian Kelly that's the difference between 8-4 and 10-2, Trevor, is that right there. That can and now not only does it help your record, but it hurts your perception of how good you are. 2021, if Notre Dame's 11-1 and USC and Stanford are like they were from 2010 to 2017, we're having a very different conversation about the impressiveness of that schedule. And guess what? Notre Dame's in the playoffs that year, Trev. They finished 5th. Why were they left out? You played only one ranked team all year, and they kicked your butt. But if they'd have lost to Cincinnati but beat a ranked Stanford team and beat a ranked USC team, like top 15 teams, guess what? They might be in the playoffs that year in 2017. Over a Clemson team that lost to 4-8 Syracuse, yeah, they'd have a shot to be in there. So that's why that stuff matters, Trev. That's why it matters. Like to have that consistently on your schedule, to have that gauge, you can get a false sense of how good you are when you don't have that on your schedule, which is what we saw in the later Brian Kelly tenure, because they beat up their regular season schedule and then they'd get to the postseason, play somebody good, and get smacked.
I think you said it really well. It's almost like a litmus test for where you're at, and it's there every single year. And here's the reality here, folks. Clemson's not as far as what like national media wants you to believe that they are. From getting back to being a perennial power in the ACC, I mean, they're still just a year removed from winning the entire conference. That included a Miami team with Cam Ward that was in that conference. That included a Louisville team in 2024 that battled Notre Dame. Notre Dame only beat by a touchdown at home. So
that beat Clemson.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So you go through and you look at how far away Clemson truly is. This isn't us standing on our soapbox saying Clemson has the same journey ahead of them to relevance that Michigan State does under Patrick Fitzgerald. No, they need to improve a couple of games here and there. You know what I mean? I mean, still
very different.
Much different, man. I mean, even today on FanDuel.
Or Stanford, right? Like we're talking about Stanford. Like their path to getting back to relevance is not the same that Andrew Luck has to get that Stanford team back to what they were under when he was playing there. Way different journey for those
significantly, man. I mean, they still have the fourth best odds right now on FanDuel to win the ACC this year, and that's with what we think of SMU. That's what we think of Miami. But the thing that I love that you said is they don't have to go back and be Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, Clemson. And I would argue in some years you might not necessarily want that. Now, you're Notre Dame. I'm not afraid to play anybody. I know Notre Dame's not afraid to play anybody, but I think of the 2028 schedule, right? You get Texas at home. You get Arkansas at home. And Arkansas is just not going to be 2-10 again. Are they going to be 10-2? I have no idea. I know they're not going to be 10-2. You get Auburn on the road at Jordan-Hare. You get Miami at home that year. You get Pitt on the road. And then you throw in a 2018 level Clemson team in there somewhere in your schedule.
Did you say Virginia Tech on the road also?
No.
Like they play them that year.
Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about the schedule for a second, Trevor. Let's look at the 27 schedule. They've got BYU at home, Auburn at home, Virginia Tech at home, Georgia Tech at home, Wake Forest in neutral field, Purdue at home, Georgia Tech, Michigan State on the road, Navy at home. That's don't know how tough of a schedule that's going to be. Maybe BYU still good. We don't know. Maybe Auburn's still good. We don't know. Maybe Virginia Tech is finally. Maybe are any of those got teams like powerhouse teams that you expect to be on the schedule? 88 Miami, 89 Miami, 90 Miami. I don't know that any of those teams are going to be. But if BYU's still a pretty good team and Auburn's a top 15 team and Virginia Tech's top 15 team, like that's nice. But like, who's the big dog you have to evaluate yourself against? All right, who's that top 5 to 10 team? You hope that it's Clemson on the road, or if Clemson's a top 12 to 15 team, but you still had to go there and prove that you can beat them. If you go beat Clemson next year on the road in 2027, and they look like they did last year, no one's going to give a rip. Well, yeah, duh. I mean, they're not very good. And you talked about 2028, Texas at home, Miami at home, at Auburn, at Virginia Tech. The reality is we expect Texas to be really good that year. Miami, we think, is going to be really good that year. So, like you said, I don't know that I want Clemson at home to be against the 2018 Clemson team. But what if Texas takes a step back? What if Miami doesn't take that jump? What if Sark goes to the NFL and their roster implodes at Texas? You know what I mean? Like, we don't know the answer to that. You look at 2029, same deal. I mean, on paper, like, holy moly, Alabama at home, at Texas, at Florida State, at NC State, home against Georgia Tech. Well, what if Auburn continues their decline? What if Florida State is still what they are now? What if Georgia Tech and the rest of the teams are what they are now? Then you play one good team, and it's at Texas. Let's say you lose that game. What's your resume builder for seeding that year? You went on the road and beat Clemson, who wasn't very good? Or boy, you played a top 10 Texas team and a top 10 Clemson team, and you split those two games, you're legit. Or, like you had those 2 wins, you lost those 2 games on the road, but you beat a really good Alabama team at home. Now, all of a sudden, you've got a different resume than like what they had this past year. That's why that matters. But if Alabama and Texas are both really good and you lose both of them, and Clemson's 7-6, 8-4, now all of a sudden you don't have that big win. You lose to Alabama and Texas in close games. They're top 5 teams, but you go on the road and beat a top 10 Clemson team. Now all of a sudden you've got a resume that you can compete with. Now, of course, the I don't want to say nightmare scenario, but the tough scenario for Notre Dame is, what if Clemson, Alabama, Texas, and Florida State are all back? Well, then the expectation for Marcus Freeman is you go 2-2 against those teams. You have 2 tough losses and 2 huge wins, and you're in the playoffs at 10-2, and you're battle-tested, ready to make that run in a 12-16 team playoff. I'm okay with that because it's about preparing yourself for the championship. We are not subscribers to the Lincoln Riley School of Cowardly Football, where we want a weak schedule that Notre Dame just dominates and goes 12-0, and that's what gets us to the playoffs. I don't care about getting the playoffs. In the last 15 years, Notre Dame has been to the playoffs, 4 times, basically? The 2012, you made the title game, right? You made the Final Four in 2018. You made it in 2020, and then you made it again in 2024. We've been there, done that. It's about winning a title. And I believe that teams that are battle-tested are better prepared to win those type of games. Now, you need at least 2, look at Indiana last year. Were they battle-tested week after week? No, but they had to play 2 really good teams before the postseason, Oregon and Ohio State, and played I think, a really good Iowa team last year. I mean, Iowa is pull off that upset against Indiana from us having a very different view of whether or not Kirk Ferentz is overrated. I mean, I'm being serious. Right? I mean, if they beat Indiana last year and everything else turns out the way that it does, now you're like, okay, Iowa did what we all keep talking about. If they do this, they could be that. Well, they just did it. Or a 10-win team last year beat Indiana. That's the whole point of the conversation. And, Mr. John says, if Notre Dame loses 2 games, they won't be in the playoff. Not necessarily.
It depends on the schedule.
But that's the whole point. That's why we're having the conversation we're having. If Clemson's legit, there's going to be years that they beat Notre Dame. They're one of their 2 losses. But look at, like I said, we're talking about the 29th schedule. They play Clemson on the road, Texas on the road, Florida State on the road, Alabama at home. If all 4 of those teams are really good versions of themselves and Notre Dame goes 2-2, guess what they're also going to have on their resume? They're going to have 2 losses. But what else are they going to have? 2 great wins, including at least 1 on the road. That's what was missing from this year's schedule. You can say, well, Notre Dame's we just saw they got left out of the playoffs, 2 losses. Yeah, guys, they got left out of the playoffs with 2 losses where their best win was over a 3-loss USC team who got smoked by Oregon more convincingly than they got smoked by Notre Dame 3 weeks later. What was the big win? Now, we kept saying there's quality wins, but there was no huge win. It was more about, but look how they dominated those 2 teams. Somebody else says a 2-loss Notre Dame team doesn't deserve a playoff spot. That's also nonsense because, again, well, actually said 26, which may be true in 26. But to Brian J. Irish just said, if Notre Dame's a 2-loss team, they don't deserve a playoff spot in 26. Don't disagree with that. But what if they had a legit big-time Clemson team on their schedule, and now they beat Clemson? Let's say they lose to Miami, go on the road or beat Miami, go on the road and lose to a top 5 Clemson team like they did in 2015, and then also lose another game, and SMU's every bit as good as we. Now we have a 10-2 record that we have a very different conversation about. And that's the point that we're making of some years you maybe don't want Clemson to be great, but there's a lot of other years where you will. Because you don't know. Let's go 2032, 2031. They play Miami at home, at Indiana home against Florida. Now, and at Clemson. Now, on paper, that looks like I have no clue how good Florida is going to be in 2031. We have no clue how good Miami is going to be, and we have no clue if Indiana is going to be able to finagle their way out of that game. Or if Kurt Cignetti's still going to be there and still good. We have no clue. But if we can just count on Clemson being what they win, because that's a team that showed for over a decade, you knew that the floor was here and the ceiling was title. You knew that every year think about this, Trev, from 2011 to 2022, Clemson won at least 10 games every year, and their lowest ranking was 22nd. Their second lowest ranking in the AP poll was 15th. And the 22nd ranking was the first year of that stretch in 2011. That's kind of what we're referring to. Is every year you know at least you've got that team on your schedule that you can build your schedule around.
100%. You said that point perfectly. It was, yes, if we take what we've learned in the past about Notre Dame's schedule, especially in 2025, you lose 2 games, should they have been in, and you played some quality teams, but not the top level teams or even a highly respectable team at that. But imagine if imagine if in 2025 they replaced Boston College out of the bye with a Clemson team that they beat in November that was ranked.
Yeah.
The narrative changes. That 10-2 is not the same as what their 10-2 schedule actually was in 2025. Like that's the biggest point. I'm with you completely. But
it's like 22. Let's say they have a win like they had in 22. A November win over the number 4 team in the country. You don't think that moves the needle at all, Trev? At all?
Well, especially because that was the gripe against Notre Dame down the stretch. It's who have they beaten?
Right.
What have they done? Because we talked about a lot of the parallels between Notre Dame and Miami's schedule, the 2 teams that the committee just really wanted to pit against each other. My counter to that is, okay, what did Alabama do down the stretch? They beat an Auburn team in the Iron Bowl by 7. They lost to Oklahoma at home for the first time in Kalen DeBoer's Alabama tenure. He loses at home. So it's like, what are you comparing that to? You're comparing the name brand. It's Oklahoma and Auburn versus Notre Dame beating Pitt and Boston College.
And they beat a ranked SEC, they beat a ranked Vanderbilt team. They beat a ranked Missouri team, a ranked Tennessee team. And now, again, 2 of those 3 teams weren't ranked by the end of the year, but they didn't stop talking about how they were ranked.
Exactly.
And if you beat a Clemson team like you beat a 3-loss Clemson team on the road in November and give them their 4th loss, then guess what? That doesn't do anything for Notre Dame. But to your point, Trev, you beat like a number 7 Clemson in November. We're having a different conversation now.
Yep. Entirely.
Yeah. And that's the whole point. That's the whole point. Because that's the one data point Clemson doesn't have, or Miami didn't have last year. Because it's more pertinent. It's the one thing Notre Dame couldn't point to last year. It was always, but look how we beat them. Look at the margin for error against this team compared to that team. Notre Dame didn't have that big November game where you could say, okay, there's no more doubting how good this team. This is a different team in November. Who cares if Pitt punched a touchdown Miami punched a touchdown at the end of the game to make that a more convincing win. That same weekend, we watched Notre Dame go on the road and beat 10-1, 9-1 Clemson, 8-1 Clemson, who then went on a roll the rest of the way. That's the difference between you being 11 and 10. I know that as Notre Dame fans, we're a little paranoid about what the committee did now. And I've now joined the paranoia that I didn't used to have because I watched with my own eyes Notre Dame get screwed. But there's some in the chat saying it's all about perception. Brian, I think you're kind of missing the point of what we're saying. You keep saying it's perception. Exactly. And the perception was Notre Dame didn't beat anybody. I feel like you need to take a deep breath and kind of hear us for a second. This is why it's important that Clemson gets back to being Clemson. Because if they're going back to being Clemson and Notre Dame had that as a win last year compared to, let's say that, the Pitt game, because there's some years, Trev, where that Notre Dame Clemson game is later in the year. It's not every year it's going to be, there's one year where it's week 1, but there's other years, 2027, the first time they play. Notre Dame plays at Clemson. It's November 13th.
Ooh.
So if in 2027 Clemson's back to being Clemson, then guess what? That's legit. In 2028, they play in Notre Dame Stadium on November 11th. That's game 10. So the whole point that we're trying to make here is that if Clemson is Clemson again, that changes the perception of how Notre Dame is viewed in college football. So, in 2031, they play in week 1. Well, what if they give Clemson their only loss that year and Clemson runs the table? That's going to mean something. Now, there's going to be some people that say, well, they're doing this now. That's fine, but it's still going to impact all the numbers that they look at. And that's the thing we're trying to say is you're saying all these things based off last year's schedule, and we're granting that. But that's exactly why you need Clemson on the schedule, and you need them to be Clemson. You need them to be perennially a top 15 team, because if you add that onto the resume, because what did we hear all November? Well, the only good team, you haven't beat anybody. And then that was the ignorant response. And then the good response was, well, outside of USC, who's just kind of okay, you haven't beat anybody. What about Pitt? Yeah, where's Pitt ranked now? After you and Miami both curb stomped them. Well, that's a good point. I mean, we're banging for, hey, we beat Navy by 30-something. They were ranked. That's kind of not where you want to be, because that's how you get left out of the playoff. But to Trev's point, let's say first weekend in November, you go on the road and beat Clemson 25-10, who's at the time 7-1, 8-1, maybe 8-0. Now all of a sudden it's like we're having a very different conversation about Notre Dame's resume last year, and Notre Dame had to go up one spot from what they were last year. One spot. And now all of a sudden it's like, okay, yeah, that's the final deal breaker. Now it's like, hey, we're not going to go back and watch week 1, because I know that Miami won the head-to-head, but Miami hasn't beat anybody since Notre Dame, and we just watched Notre Dame in November go on the road and beat Clemson. Not 4-loss Clemson, but top 10 Clemson, top 12 Clemson. That's the point. Now the perception changes about their schedule. And that's the whole argument that we're trying to make, y'all, is that right there. Or you don't have Miami on the schedule, and the team you lost to is a legit Clemson. You're going to get more credit for a 3-point loss on the road at big-time Clemson than you at Miami, who has yet to prove themselves as a big-time program. That's the whole point. That's why Clemson getting back to being Clemson is good for Notre Dame, and that's why Notre Dame fans, and I know it's going to be hard for some people. My guy, Chris, I know, brother, this is going to be hard for you. But as a Notre Dame fan, that's why you want Dabo to figure this out, or somebody to step in and replace him who can figure it out. It's good for Notre Dame if Clemson gets back to being some version of Clemson. We don't need to be 16-18, or every year they're like 18 Clemson. I don't know that that's a good idea. Although I think this Notre Dame team could absolutely go toe-to-toe with that Clemson team. Beat them? Who knows? But it's going to be a great game. Point is that it gives Notre Dame a foundation on their schedule every year that we know we've got that. And that changes the perception, and it changes how Pete Bavacqua schedules moving forward.
100%. The ascension of Clemson has the ability to make Notre Dame's schedule and their resume snub-proof. Because, Brian, your concerns are valid. Brian Irish in the chat, they're valid. I get it. I still remember the day the committee released their final rankings, and it stunk. It stung, and I get it. But I think that's the hardest part about looking at what the reality of Notre Dame and Clemson being. And, we talk all the time. We don't know what a team is going to be in 10 years. How is that going to look? And look, is that fair? Sure. But one thing that I do know is that a program that has been really good for a decade straight, Clemson, has gone on a stint that long, Clemson, and it still has the head coach that did that in Dabo Swinney. They're all still there right now. We can evaluate this conversation if Dabo Swinney leaves Clemson and who steps in and who does what. But by and large, whether it's Dabo Swinney, whether it's somebody else that steps in and takes over, Notre Dame needs that for Clemson for their resume. And it would be good from a college football standpoint for Notre Dame to have a consistent rival on their schedule every year. That's what this could be. And it won't be like one of those rivals. Like it won't replace the meaning of Notre Dame USC. It won't replace the hatred of Notre Dame, Michigan. It's not going to be to the same degree as the game between Ohio State and Michigan, but it could definitely have that like annual feeling that like Alabama LSU had, during that stint when it was like Saban versus Les Miles. And it could have that impact where there's postseason implications on the line every time you play familiar opponents. I could see it being that. I could. It won't be like one of those storied rivalries, but it gives you that for the next decade or so. And that's another thing I hope it brings to the table.
It's important. And as we said before, I do think we can't overlook the fact that Clemson being that good gives you also something to recruit against, to coach against, to prepare against, to say we've got to figure out a way to beat Clemson. And if you can figure out a way to beat Clemson, then you know you can beat anybody if Clemson's Clemson. And the same thing is true for Clemson. That's why Dabo always put those good teams on the schedule. That's why they played Georgia. That's why they've played, Texas A&M. That's why they've played Auburn, all these good teams out of conference, LSU, because Dabo's like, I know we're not getting that test in the ACC anymore. At least not enough. Maybe we get that one tough test against Florida State, but that's it. We've got to have a gauge. We've got to have teams that can challenge us, that can test us. And that's why you see Clemson schedule the way that they do, Trev, is, they're not just like, okay, they don't play anybody good. I mean, you look at some of the teams they play in future seasons, and it's not just Notre Dame that they're adding to their schedule. First of all, they play South Carolina every year. So obviously that's part of it. So now you're going to have Notre Dame and South Carolina every year. In 2029, they're going to play Georgia, Notre Dame, and South Carolina. In 2030, they play Notre Dame, Georgia, and South Carolina. In 2031, the same thing. In 2032, Georgia's back on the schedule for now. They play Georgia, South Carolina, and Notre Dame. And in those years they play Georgia and Notre Dame, they play them in the same place both times. So either they're both home games or both road games every year. So those things matter. And so Clemson understands that. Dabo, who understands that, 2035, they have Oklahoma and Notre Dame and South Carolina on the schedule. Because they know we need tough gauges. We need teams that can test us, that could, if we don't play our game, if we have holes, can expose those holes. Now, you hope you still win those games. But we've seen it a lot, Trev, where a team didn't really know what they didn't know what they didn't know till it was too late. Well, no one's ever been exposed that before. Somebody in the chat earlier made a great point about Texas Tech. They never got exposed in the regular season, so they never knew what, I use that, like, thinking of, like, just kind of like back in ancient, not ancient times, I'm talking about, but like back 200-300 years ago when, you had these big old ships, right? You can't plug a hole in the bottom of your ship if you don't know if you don't go down there and check and you don't know it's there, and it's too late. Like, oh, wow, we've taken on too much water. We can't get it out now, right? Like, if you see those things exposed, you find out early in the season, boom, you plug it, and then now let's go figure it out. Or if hopefully you can plug it. Or if you can't plug it, how can we protect against it? But when you're playing far inferior teams every year, it's harder to get that exposed. So like, here's another example too, Trev, is we feel that Notre Dame would have been able to do major damage in the playoffs last year if they got there. But we're basing that off of how they beat up a bunch of mediocre to bad teams. With one exception, USC, and they didn't play great against USC and still beat them convincingly. But we'd have a much different conversation about how we feel Notre Dame would be if they'd run the table after the Texas A&M loss and beat a 9-1 Clemson team, or it'd be a 8-1 Clemson team in game 10. And then Clemson goes and wins their final two. Now you're like, okay, now I'm confident we would have done damage because look what we did, on November 13th when we went and played Clemson. It's important to know. It's very important to know those things. So all these things factor in, Trev, of why it's important. And then here's the final piece for me. What's Notre Dame's rivalry anymore? We've talked in the past how what teams would you like to see become a rivalry? And a team we've talked about before, hey, Notre Dame and Clemson are kind of building a nice little rivalry here. There's respect between the programs. They've played some great games. They've played some very meaningful games. They've played in the playoff. They've played in a game of top 10 teams. They've played actually, games where Clemson beat a highly ranked Notre Dame team. Notre Dame beat a highly ranked Clemson team. They've played in the ACC championship game. And Dabo has always been respectful of Notre Dame. There's a mutual appreciation as a rival that could maybe become a little bit more, okay, now we're really wanting to beat you now if they're playing every year. It'd just be nice to kind of have that game on a schedule where you have a little bit of a rivalry, where it's not like that I hate you rivalry, but maybe it becomes that when these teams start playing each other and knocking each other off and becoming, because what made the Notre Dame USC rivalry so great for so many years? How USC fans, we'd have X number of championships if it wasn't for freaking Notre Dame. You know who else says that? Notre Dame fans. We'd have X number of championships if it wasn't for freaking USC. Ara Parseghian probably have 4 titles if it wasn't for USC. 4 or 5 titles. That's nice to have, Trev.
The biggest thing it brings to the table is a competitive rivalry. That's the biggest thing, because Notre Dame has rivals, to your point. Like, they'll still play Navy every year. You know, we talk about Pitt, like Michigan State is back on, and like that's cool for like fanfare of like, I remember growing up and watching them play Michigan State, or like if they added Michigan back, it's like, man, it's, you know, it makes me think back to when I was a little kid watching Notre Dame and Michigan. And I think all those are fair, but like, we have to be honest about something. Their biggest rivalry, USC, by and large, since 2010, their games haven't been competitive either way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, whether it was Notre Dame getting their teeth kicked in 2016, or what Notre Dame did to them in 2017, or what Notre Dame did to them in 2023, or kind of what they did to them in 2024, kind of what they did to them in 2025. And so you get my point. Clemson has the ability to make it a more competitive rivalry. And when I mean competitive, I don't mean trading blows every year. You know, where starting in 27, it's just a back and forth of who wins every single year. But in that, the games aren't competitive with some of these. Like, Stanford's a rival. They lost in 2022, but even then, it's like, by and large, lately, Notre Dame blows the doors off of Stanford. So it's just, I like the fact that it has the opportunity to be a competitive rivalry. That's the biggest thing.
Trev, I want to give some data to your point, because I always like doing that to back up what you're saying. From 2010 to 2025, Notre Dame and USC played each other, I believe, 15 times, right? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, right? Because they didn't play in 2020. Only 4 of those games were one-possession games. 4 of them. And some of those one-possession games weren't as close as the final score dictated at the end. Notre Dame was up on USC late, 24-10. And then USC scored a late touchdown. Now, it was competitive early. Notre Dame scored 24 unanswered. USC scored last. The 14-10 game in 2013, I contend, only was competitive because Tommy Rees got knocked out early in the game, and Notre Dame could do nothing offensively. If Tommy plays, I think they win that game. That's probably a double-digit game. And then, of course, you had the one in 2010 that was Notre Dame's first win in 8 years. So, like, they haven't been overly competitive games, and none of USC's wins were single-digit games. All 4 of USC's wins over Notre Dame. So Notre Dame is 11-4 against USC in that stretch, and all 4 of USC's wins in that stretch were multiple possession games. You say, well, if Notre Dame would have done this, if they would have done that, yeah, but they didn't. If they punch it in the end zone fourth quarter instead of Dane having the ball go through his legs, and Fritz Starling, Jawanza Starling doesn't pick it up and turn it back 90 yards, they tie that. Yeah, but they didn't. That's the whole point. They didn't. All 4 of those wins were multiple possession games. That they haven't been competitive. And it hasn't been very often that Notre Dame has played USC ranked. And when they have played them ranked, a lot of times they don't finish ranked. You could go back. There have not been a lot of ranked versus ranked games. And sometimes it's Notre Dame not holding up their end of the bargain. So, yeah, it'd be nice to have a rivalry that matters, like Clemson. And even when Stanford and Notre Dame were, when Stanford's really good, a lot of those times Notre Dame wasn't ranked when they played. And there was a year where Notre Dame beat Stanford. I think Stanford was like 6th or 7th coming into the game, and then finished with 5 losses and unranked. We haven't seen that at Notre Dame in a while, where you have that rival where every year you're both ranked, and at the end of the year, you're both ranked. And it'd be really nice to have. Really nice to have. And Clemson's the only option for that right now. And so that's why we argue that it'd be good for Notre Dame to have that. And I think rivalries are good for football. And I'm okay with new rivalries coming along. Teams that are rivals now weren't always rivals. Notre Dame and Miami weren't rivals until the 80s. They weren't rivals in the period before that when Notre Dame was beating Miami every year. Rivalries sometimes come along later. And I think that's something that adds a little bit of flavor to the season. So those are all the reasons why we think if Clemson's good, it's good for Notre Dame. Now, I guess the final piece, Trev, is let's just talk briefly about what do they need to do to figure it out. I mean, I loved your point earlier. They're not as far away as people think. They're not. When I look at this Clemson team, there's a couple areas they've got to figure out. Number one, they've got to figure out how to get the culture back that Clemson had. That toughness, everybody's bought into the one goal. They did not have that last year. Clemson did not have a 7-6 roster last year. Not even close.
No.
But the culture was shook. They've got to get back to – go ahead, Trev.
No, I was just going to say, I agree, man. I mean, it's when you think of Dabo Swinney and the main driver of the Roy bus and nobody believing in him, that narrative worked because the team believed. It doesn't work as much when the team doesn't believe. That's the tough part. When Dabo Swinney can't be at the top of the hill preaching, nobody expected us to be here, when some of his own players are like, yeah, we didn't either. That doesn't work out as well. And that's what their team was in 2025. That's how you take top-level talent and you want to perform and go 7-6. I'm with you entirely.
Mm-hmm. Now, kind of beyond that, it's you got to get back to being big dogs in the trenches. Like, you know, you've got to get back to where your D-line every year is dominant. You got to get back to where your offensive line doesn't have to be a bunch of elite players, but they play really well together. That's what they got to get back to.
Agreed. Elevated play in the trenches. And then the final thing that I'll add is they need to do better at quarterback evaluation and development. Not just pay attention to, well, we brought in the highly ranked kid. It's like, yes, but is he a fit for your program and what you need to do? What did Taj Boyd, Deshaun Watson, and Trevor Lawrence all have in common? They had the ability to kind of put a program on its shoulders and kind of carry it through some of the rough times, not through the duration of a season. You know, sometimes with like Deshaun Watson, especially in like 2015, they had to a little bit. Mike Williams was in and out of the lineup. You had a decent running back in Wayne Gallman. He was very serviceable. He was not what Travis Etienne was to Trevor Lawrence, though. But even that freshman year, Trevor Lawrence, the pass game wasn't getting going. So what did he do? He started making plays with his legs in the college football playoff semifinal against Ohio State. Big reason why they ended up winning it. He didn't light them up through the air.
He had 100 yards rushing that game. It was just, and it was only his sophomore year, Trev. Like you said, he was still young, but Ohio State's corners were locking the receivers down.
Yes.
So Trevor's like, I got this.
Yep. Since then, they haven't had that. And kudos to Dabo Swinney very quickly identifying that, like Kelly Bryant in 2017, he was an athletic kid. He was a serviceable quarterback. But in 2018, they quickly transitioned to Trevor Lawrence because he had that quality. He had that quality about him. Then after that, DJ Uiagalelei did not. He could put up stats. He could put up numbers, but he couldn't do that. He couldn't be that guy where everybody else on the team could look at him and say, okay, hey, 5's got us. We're good. They could do that with 16. Different conversation with 5. And then Cade Klubnik enters the conversation. Again, another highly ranked kid, has the ability to put up a lot of numbers. Even you and I were talking about in 2024. It's like, I did not think he had 36 passing touchdowns.
Yeah.
You know,
we watched him play and we're like, yeah, he just hasn't. And then you're like, dude,
yeah,
his numbers were a lot better than we thought they were.
Yep. But in the moments where it counted, when they needed to sit back and look, hey, 2, you got to get us out of this. Yeah. He couldn't. That's the next step in
and he was never going to be that guy. No. That's the thing, Trev. Like, he could have been a good quarterback if you put some better pieces around it, but they didn't develop him well either. But he was never going to be Deshaun. He was never going to be Taj. He was never going to be Trevor Lawrence. And now, look, what's one thing that DJ and Cade Klubnik had in common? They're both 5-star recruits. So I love that you said evaluation and recruiting. And I felt like Clemson did a bad job of recruiting quarterbacks that fit who they wanted to be. Like, they wanted to run this system with mobile quarterbacks, and they just looked at DJ and thought, he's athletic. We can make him a mobile quarterback. He wasn't a runner. He was never comfortable as a runner. It was a bad evaluation. Now you want a recruiting battle. And honestly, that's where Dabo started to go down. They never won a championship with a number 1 ranked recruiting class on their roster that was beyond freshmen. I think their first number 1 or top 3 ranked recruiting class, I think, was 2018, which were freshmen on that championship team. Not a ton of them played, but they started, that number 1 class didn't exactly pan out. The last team Trevor played on wasn't as good as the first team Trevor played on. Not because he got worse or he wasn't the guy, because the overall roster wasn't as good. And I think Dabo started going after guys that didn't fit the system or guys that were highly ranked but weren't actually the same kind of player, because they landed some highly ranked players. Justin Ross was highly ranked. T. Higgins was highly ranked. But they did a great job of finding those under-the-radar guys as well. And that's an area where Clemson has done a poor job in recent years. They haven't found and developed those kind of guys. Their defense has never recovered since Brent Venables left. I think Tom Allen can get them going. But the other part is they just have never – they don't have the talent on offense. Clemson has never had a great scheme. They had great players in a good scheme, and that allowed them to go out there and be dominant because they're in their offensive line, played great five-man football. They had a potential first-round draft pick on this last year's team, and their offensive line was mediocre. And I don't know what they're doing at running back. Like some of their decisions at running back have just been like, okay, apparently you don't care about running back. Well, then go to the portal and get one, dude. Like, that's the other thing is you got to get back to your culture's got to be good. You've got to be able to identify, recruit, and develop those Isaiah Simmons 3-star kind of guys. You know, there was a lot of guys like that they recruited over the years that weren't highly ranked players that turned into studs. But you also have to make sure you're also getting the highly ranked guys like AJ Terrell was a stud. You know, Justin Ross was a stud. Trevor was a stud. Deshaun Watson was a stud coming out of high school. It's okay to get those guys. Travis Etienne, not a 5-star, 3-star, I believe, on most of the services. So, yeah, that's an area that's missing. And then the final piece is you also have to – you can't just go all the way back to the way it was at the beginning. You have to adapt to the modern era. You have to understand if we want to get some top recruits, we have to be willing to spend money on them. That doesn't mean you have to get into bidding wars for every top kid. Look at Notre Dame. Look at Georgia. They're not doing that. If a kid wants to take $3 million to go to Texas Tech, then okay. Go to Texas Tech and enjoy getting beat in the first round of the playoffs every year. And enjoy spending the next 4 years, 4 years in Lubbock, Texas. Have fun with that. But, hey, you got your $3 million. Or come here for $1.5 million or $1 million, have opportunities to make more money, get a degree that matters, and actually play on a team that can win a championship in an, you know what I mean? like in an area that is I would imagine that I've been in Clemson, South Carolina. I'd rather live in Clemson, South Carolina than some of the cities in Texas that have college football teams, not SMU and TCU. I mean, that's good areas, but like I've been in College Station. You know, I've familiar with Lubbock, Texas. Like those aren't necessarily places I'd want to live all the time, but that's the kind of thing is there are guys out there like that. You got to find them and identify them, develop them, but then you got to supplement better through the portal. Here's my advice to Dabo Swinney. Coach, you did some great things. You got to get back to the way things used to be for you. But when it comes to how to handle modern athletes, there's one program you need to kind of model how you build your roster after, and it's Notre Dame. Marcus Freeman is still very much we're going to be a high school-driven recruiting program. Number 2, we're not just going to go out there and buy players. We're going to be competitive on the NIL market. But if your whole thing is you're going to go to the highest bidder, we're not for you. This is not the place for you. Right? We're going to make a competitive offer. If you want it, great. And think about all the other things we're going to offer you. But if it comes down to, Coach, you're my number one school, but I need you to match this offer, well, then we're not your number one school. Because if you're a number one school, you'd take this offer and you'd come play for us, knowing that there's even more opportunities down the road if you turn out to be the player we think you're going to be. But if it's all about we got to match this offer, then maybe this isn't the place for you. Sometimes maybe you do match it. Sometimes you don't. Depends on the circumstance and the player. But it's got to come down to that, but then also saying we've got to do better in the portal. We've got to be willing to go get, and even if it means spending money on a big-time portal player, as long as we've done our due diligence to make sure that kid fits our program. Notre Dame spent money on Riley Leonard. Don't kid yourself. Notre Dame spent money to get Malachi Fields here. Don't kid yourself. They spent money on those guys. They didn't come for the Notre Dame discount. They didn't come for here's a Costco card and a $100 gift card to Ruth's Chris, which means you're probably still have to fork over more than we're giving you a gift card. You know what I mean? Like, oh, cool. Thanks, coach. That's how bad I want the Notre Dame degree in the semester I'm going to be on campus. You know what I mean? Like but those guys were also great fits for the culture they're trying to build. Yeah, they paid money to get Riley Leonard, but Riley Leonard fit what everything the Notre Dame was about. They did a good evaluation of the person and the player. Same thing with Malachi Fields. He didn't come for, hey, here's a gift card to, Martin's. We love you. And here's your Foot Locker gift card. Let's have some fun. They paid him handsomely. But Malachi was a great fit for who Notre Dame is and what the program's all about. Did you ever once see Malachi Fields on the field last year sulking because he wasn't getting targeted as much as he got taught sorry in Virginia. No. You saw him and Jordan Faison basically playing tag as they're running down the field because they just dominated blocking and they're chasing Jeremiah Love. He looked bought in. Matter of fact, a lot of times on those long runs, the first guy to meet him in the end zone, Jeremiah Love, was Malachi. Did he look like, I'm pissed I'm not getting targeted? No, he didn't, because he was bought into the team objective. There are players out there like that Dabo can find as well. They've got to have a bigger department. They're waiting too long to get on those guys, and they're not getting into that fight. You got to start evaluating those players way before those guys jump in the portal. You kind of got to have an idea of what you're doing in there. I think that's where Dabo needs to be. Get back to what made you, while also saying we've got to adapt to these new realities. Is there a program out there that's doing it the way that we'd be comfortable doing it? That one. And that kind of ties in with the rivalry thing. There's programs out there. Ohio State's kind of similar to that. Somebody in the chat said you got to spend your money on retaining your good players first. That's what Clemson has done. Clemson hasn't lost many players they want. Name me the big-time player Clemson lost that they wanted to keep in the portal. There's not many, if any. Well, they lost Khalil Barnes. Like I said what I said. Who's the player they lost that they wanted to keep? Bo Collins. I repeat, who's the player they lost that they wanted to keep? Not that they didn't want Bo Collins. They just weren't going to pay to keep Bo Collins because they had that freshman class coming in and they had some other dudes. Receiver was not their problem in 2024. So, and Clemson has money. There's no doubt about that. That's a program that's got some money. Do they have Texas money? No. But they don't need that. So that's kind of my thing, Trev, is there's a model out there for you, and it's the school you're going to play the next 12 years. And if he's not willing to do that, then his tenure will be over sooner rather than later, and they've got to make sure they hire a coach that is willing to embrace that. And my guess would be they're going to go the Mark Richt to Kirby Smart type of change, where Mark Richt was very much I don't want to play that game. I don't want to do this. We're not going to do that. We're going to run this kind of program. And Georgia fans didn't like it. They wanted someone that was going to play the game because they wanted to win. They didn't care. Georgia fans, by and large, that I've seen very few that care that they've had all these kids arrested over the years. Well, we won 2 titles. Who cares? Sadly, that's what I've seen. Dabo's not that way. They will replace him with somebody that's more like Kirby, and they'll probably win a lot. Either way, I want Coach Sweeney to be the one that turns it back around. I hate when legends finish on bad notes. I hated that when Bobby Bowden did it. I like seeing legends go out when they're on their terms, with their team doing well. And that's what I'd like to see from Coach. Because I do like him. I do like him. I respect him. Don't agree with everything he says and does. I don't like how he's engaging the modern era. But I have a lot of respect for Dabo. And it's good for Notre Dame if he can figure this thing out. It really is.
Agreed 100%, man. I'm with you. I do think we have a super chat left over before we hop out of here.
We had one here from Jari Z. Bear. I'll let you get this one, Trev, because you like to talk a lot about Colton Joseph. Thank you for super chat, Jari. If Colton Joseph hits for Wisconsin, then I think Wisconsin could be a team that will help our schedule. Love IB. Trev, I know you've talked about this one as well.
Yeah, appreciate the super chat. Potentially. I like Colton Joseph. I like what he did at Old Dominion. I think he's the style of quarterback that will force Luke Fickell into more of the identity of what Wisconsin should be about. Not West Coast, run and gun, but being built in the trenches. I think he followed that up with really great running backs in the portal with Abu Sama and Brian Jackson, 2 guys that fit that mold. Here's the thing that we're going to have to keep in mind about Wisconsin. It's not going to draw the national attention for the first couple of weeks that it should. Notre Dame needs to be big Wisconsin fans after this game because they're not going to get the recognition for doing it immediately. Like they beat a team that's coming off of a 4-8 season in the season opener in a neutral site game. Even though the neutral site game is closer to Madison, Wisconsin than it is South Bend, Indiana, you're not going to get that love. Now, this could be the type of game where if Notre Dame wins and wins dominantly, I think FanDuel has them at like 18.5 odds right now. Like the spread for the game, I think, is at 18.5, which is by far the largest winning margin in opening weekend. But if Wisconsin ends up being a 7-5, 8-4 type of football team, that could be the win that they look back to in the season opener and say, yeah, okay, that did something. Like, let's not forget, it'll be the afterthought. They're not going to look at it higher than Miami or BYU or SMU, but then that fourth game on Notre Dame's schedule is no longer Navy. It could be, they'd be a pretty good Wisconsin team. I think it could be that. I'm with you.
It's up to 19.5. I just checked. Yesterday it was 18.5. Today it's 19.5. And I don't think it's going to go back down. I think it's only going to go up and up and up. Yeah, I mean, like if you're rooting for Wisconsin, you're like, okay, lose to Notre Dame and then 3 weeks later go into Happy Valley and do something. You know what I mean? Like that would be an ideal scenario for Notre Dame in that world. So great super chat, Trev. How this schedule plays out, it's going to be fascinating. It really will. And I think some teams will do exactly what we say they need them to do, and some won't. The question that we're going to be, and what we'll spend the next 8 months figuring out, actually be 7.5 months figuring out, is which ones do what we need them to do and which ones don't. And then on balance, does it lean more towards, okay, the schedule ended up being better than we thought? Does it end up being worse than we thought? Is it basically what we thought? And then who's we? Is it what we think of the schedule? Is it what the national media thinks of the schedule? That's going to really be the interesting thing here over the next 8.5 months is that. And we're going to talk about a lot of this stuff over the summer. Obviously, we got a little over a week left before the spring game. Once we get out of spring game, we'll do kind of like spring wrap-up shows, and we'll kind of, do position stuff, and then we'll dive into our summer stuff in May, June, and July. Going to have a lot to talk about. College football, we're going to do a lot more college football topics this offseason. It's something that has been requested by our subscribers. We put a thread on the board, and I've got it saved. So we're definitely going to tap into those things that you'd like for us to talk about. And we were surprised, Trev, how much college football stuff. We want to hear more about college football. I was so excited to hear that because I love a fan base that isn't just, we only care about our team. It's like Andrew Gilmore in the chat. We're disagreeing on some things in the chat today. So like it's back to normal. We're not, he was on fire. He had a couple but the thing we're disagreeing on though, but we're talking about not just Notre Dame. There's a familiarity. We're like, hey, they're doing this, they're doing this. And I think that's what a fan base should be, especially a fan base like Notre Dame, because if you don't know what these other teams are, then you don't know how to evaluate your program compared to that team. So I was excited about that, and I'm looking forward to that. And we've also got plenty of stuff going on at IB that's Notre Dame related. I dropped late last night a breakdown video. It's about 20-minute long video where I say I think the Notre Dame run game is going to look different in 2026. Schematically, not different, but emphasis wise. And I make my case, and I show some stats, and then I drop in and show some film as to why I think the run game is going to look differently and why it's going to look differently. It's not just simple as, well, you don't have two stars. It's deeper than that. It's about style of them, and it's also about the offensive line. And we talk about Mike Denbrock's history a little bit as well. So I know Trev checked it out before the show today. I think it was really good stuff. I enjoyed putting it together, and we'll have a lot more of that stuff. And that's for the message board only. I only put those things out. It's got all 22 film in it, breakdowns of all the plays. It's awesome stuff. So you're definitely going to want to check it out. But that's for board members only. So you're definitely going to make sure you go to boards.irishbreakdown.com, sign up for our premium membership. You can do a monthly membership, which is $6.99 a month, or an annual membership at $69.99 a month. If you have joined or haven't joined, either way, and you want to upgrade either to one of our booster clubs, or if you just want to sign up for the first time in the booster club, you can do that as well. Chris Galloway recently, Black Irish 864, just recently went from an annual membership to one of the premium memberships. So he got a new IB Club mug, which he already put on the Irish Breakdown Facebook page, showed a picture of that, and already had coffee stains on it, like mine has coffee stains on it. It's like this, but it says IB, and then it has club underneath. You can't buy it in the store. I don't have one. Trev doesn't have one. It literally only goes to Booster Club members. If you're in the Shamrock or Blue Club, you get the IB Club mug. And if you're in the Gold Club, so I think Chris is in the Gold Club, you not only get the mug, but you also get an IB Gold Club t-shirt, which, again, only goes out to Gold Club members. So that's for those people who say, hey, we love what you're doing. We want to support you guys above and beyond just the normal membership, so you can go that way. Because I've had people say, you should charge more. Okay, well, how about then you join the Booster Club and you can choose to pay more if you want. And we appreciate that. And those little items are a thank you from us to you guys for being a part of what we do at Irish Breakdown. So I definitely want to check that out. And as we say all the time, it's the best way to support us, the absolute best way to support us. So we appreciate you. Great show today. Trev, this week was, I think, we're going to have obviously a mailbag tomorrow. We will be live Saturday after the practice. We will get together and talk about it. A lot of interesting topics, but I'm really excited about this offseason. And the big reason why is because of how excited I am for this college football season, not just from a Notre Dame standpoint, but just college football standpoint, which makes a lot of these topics so much fun to dive into. And I thought we had a really fun week of shows. I hope you guys all enjoyed the shows this week. We'll be back tomorrow at 1 o'clock for a mailbag. Trevor will be with me tomorrow for a mailbag. And then not a specific time on Saturday. It's just whenever the practice is over. It's in the morning. We got to come home. We've got to write our reports and all that kind of stuff. So I would imagine it's going to be later in the afternoon, like 1 or 2 o'clock, somewhere around there. It's probably when we'll go live. But that's why, Trev, you have to be a subscriber to the page. And that's why you need to make sure that you've got the notification bell on. And if you're on X and you follow me on Twitter, we always put that out. And of course, if you're a premium message board member, we always put links to the shows on there before we go. So you definitely want to do that. And you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So for Trevor, I'm Brian. Have an awesome rest of your day. Tonight, 5 o'clock, IB Nation Sports Talk. Be there with the guys, and then we'll see you all again tomorrow at 1 o'clock for the Friday mailbag. So thanks for joining us on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.